Welcome to Sunflower Movement. I am your host, Ashley Buckner. Before we get started, here's a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. I am a licensed therapist, but unless you have a signed consent form with me, I am not your therapist. This platform is not a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Sunflowers bloom in the most unexpected places, and they adjust to remain connected to the sun. Metaphorically, I define these sunflower movements as experiences with people, places, and moments where we feel seen, heard, and believed. Thank you for tuning in. I wanted to give you all an update about my prana mat. If you follow me, you know I use the prana mat. I talk about it quite frequently. I will say the mat itself is spendy, and I also want to say that I use the mat every single day. So it is something that you can get your money's worth if you're interested. How I use the mat is I lay on it in various parts of my body, mostly my back and my shoulders, especially if I have a lot of tension up there in my neck. I also will use it on the back of my legs, my hamstrings, especially if I get a hard workout in and I'm feeling sore. Also, the game-changing place for me has been on my stomach. I lay on my stomach for about 20 minutes a day, and it has helped me reduce the extra skin and created more elasticity that I lost since having babies. It has been a night and day difference, and I love my mat for this reason, because it's a very simple tool that I also get to decompress with. If you're interested, visit pranamat.com and use Ashley B at checkout. I am so excited to be partnering with Armra Colostrum. It is one of my favorite supplements. I've been using it for the last year. I have it every single day in my smoothies. I mix it in my hydration drinks, sometimes just in plain water. What I have noticed is that it really helps with my recovery. So after a hard workout, my body feels more rejuvenated. I have noticed my digestion is better. I have less overall bloating. Additionally, my hair is very strong and healthy and thick. Also, the immunity building part of this supplement is incredible. My kids have brought home so much sickness this year, and I have stayed relatively healthy. This is my go-to supplement. I have it every single day. Highly recommend. Use Ashley Buckner at checkout for a discount. Visit tryarmra.com. All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm actually really excited for this episode. I'm going to introduce my guest today. It's my friend and former boyfriend, high school boyfriend, Gavin Lambeth. We dated 20 years ago.
20, yep.
And now we're going to sit down and have a conversation. We've ran into each other here and there, and I think we've connected a couple times post-dating, but I think this will be the most intelligent, mature conversation we've ever had. And I think it's going to be really special because we both grew up in Cedar City, Utah, and yeah. Welcome, Gavin.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Are you sure?
I am sure, actually.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing is amazing work, and I really actually feel strongly about it as well, because I know that I have my own stuff that I had to deal with from being raised a certain way.
Yep.
And so I love everything you're doing and think that message needs to be shared. So,
well, I appreciate it. I'm really glad you're here. And just so everyone knows, like, Gavin and I have been connecting via Instagram.
Yep.
And for a while now. And I've even connected with your wife.
Oh yeah, she was telling me that.
Yeah. We've messaged back and forth. And so it's just nice to kind of have this like full circle moment. And as I've been thinking about this conversation, I'm almost like 16-year-old me could have never had this conversation.
17-year-old me never could have had a conversation like this with anybody.
Yeah, same. And I also think too, and I just want the listeners to know, Gavin was my favorite high school boyfriend. Probably the healthiest high school boyfriend I ever had. So props to you, Gav.
Still probably wasn't healthy, though.
but I mean, like, when I reflected, I had too many high school boyfriends, way too many. But I just feel like this relationship is something that I'm really comfortable to talk about, or
absolutely.
You know, just our whole journey. But I think before we I think there's you had a lot of life happen before you and I ever started dating.
Sure.
So are you okay just kind of sharing a little bit about like how you grew up? You were obviously raised Mormon, and yes. Gavin served a Mormon mission.
I did.
He went to Russia, and I know because he wrote me, and he brought me home the warmest winter hat I've ever
Oh,
tried on
yeah.
before.
That caused a stir in the family, by the way. I'll talk about that maybe
Okay,
later.
okay. So yeah, why don't you just kind of tell us where you were born, all the things.
So born and raised here in Cedar City. My parents both born and raised here as well. So long time, multi-generational family growing up here on both sides. Thought Cedar City was the center of the universe and everything else revolved around it. Typical being raised Mormon, right? I was young, I was naive, I was dumb. We were kind of good Mormons, but kind of not. We went to church most Sundays, I feel like, but it was about half the time. So I think we went enough never to be considered inactive, but we didn't go enough that we were there every week. Like we were not every week people most of the time, unless like my mom or dad, somebody had a calling that had to have them there. Most of the time it was just like, once, twice a month, we're good. We're good. So that was pretty typical, but for whatever reason, growing up, I just was, from a very young age, I can really remember just being like, I'm going to do everything perfect. I'm going to read my scriptures. I'm going to pray. I'm going to get all this knowledge. I'm going to go on a mission. Like, it was just like marriage in the temple, like from a really, really young age. I'm talking like 5, 6 years old. Like I have memories that's what I was like telling myself in my head, sitting in primary, just being like, hey, yeah, this is going to be the greatest. Like I have all of the answers.
What's coming up for me, and I really appreciate you sharing this because I talk about it all the time, but people just do not get it that a 6-year-old can have these type of thoughts.
Right.
They're very real in this culture.
Oh, I absolutely think so. And I guess that's part of what's hard for me right now. And we haven't really talked about this, but my daughter is 7. She'll be turning 8 in May. And she really likes to go to church with her friends who all are still Mormon, most of them, because we live in Utah. And so my wife and I are fairly open to saying, hey, we're not against you going, even though we're both out and we've both left. But it's one of those things where I struggle because I know the thoughts I had leading up to baptism and wondering what she's having. And then like wondering, am I causing her more trauma because I'm not in the church and I'm not going to be able to baptize her? Because if I were to go ask, they would be like, oh, actually, we need to excommunicate you instead of let you go through to baptize your daughter. Like, there's just no chance that they would let me. So that's where I struggle with like letting my daughter go do those things, because I know some of the thoughts that she may be having and may be getting told. Mm-hmm. But it's something my wife and I really try to talk with her about and just say, hey, there's other ways to view the world and to think about things, and it's not always just this way. But I think that's really hard for a 7-year-old to understand.
It's super hard for a 7-year-old to understand it. And I think it's a really hard part of this culture of like, they are going to get invited to church by their friends. And there's a part of me that wants to say yes to that. Right. To let them go and experience. And then what are the conversations looking like when you come home? And I mean, it's really complex. And then you throw in your own trauma to that.
Right.
And I have to really check myself too of like, what's mine?
Right.
Because part of why I internalize things and probably you internalize things is because that was everywhere. It wasn't just at church, right?
Exactly.
And it was felt energetically in your home. I guess I'm going to get off track already. What happens if she asks if she wants to be baptized right now?
I mean, she's going to want to get baptized, I think. Mm-hmm. She's already been planning it herself.
Okay.
She's one of our neighbors, pretty close family friend, but they are still active. And she thinks that her friend, who's going to be 8 in January, has just this lovely voice. And so she's like, my daughter's planning her own baptism of having her little friend sing at her baptism. And I'm just like, I don't know if that's quite how it works, but sure, maybe that can happen. So she's definitely planning on it. And I've kind of planted the seed that, hey, you're probably going to have to ask one of your grandpas because your dad's not going to be able to do that for you. Like, that's just not going to be something that they're going to let me do at this point.
Yeah. Are you okay with her making this kind of commitment?
It's one of those things where I'm like torn both ways, where I'm just like, in the end, it may not matter because she'll see me, she'll see my wife, she'll see our son, her older brother, who is not baptized and specifically chose not to be. And so I think that this is kind of just a phase that she's going through growing up. She wants to be accepted. She wants to feel part of something that her friends are all part of. And so she wants to be in it. I don't think it's going to be a lasting thing because I think that my wife and I have too many like thoughts around just being open-minded.
Yeah.
That she's going to get a lot of that from us just naturally.
Yes.
And just talking. And so I think that it will fizzle out. And by the time she's, graduated from high school, I doubt she'll be part of it. In fact, I don't even think she'll probably be in it, midway through high school. So
yeah.
Even if she decides to do it, I think she'll be out of it by sophomore year.
Yeah. And conversations that you guys are having leading up to it, I'm sure, about like, this is what the commitment means, like
right.
all of the stuff that she's taking on. And also what's coming up for me. And I mean, I don't know like your spiritual views or religious views, but at the end of the day, does it really matter, right? Like,
Exactly.
Are we really baptized in the one true church?
Right.
I think if you've deconstructed and worked through some of that, in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter if you let her get baptized, right?
Well, that's exactly it. Like, and for me, for my wife, like, we're out of the church. We would not consider ourselves members at all anymore, but our names are still on the church records. Mm-hmm. Why? Laziness and avoidance.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's a pain in the ass.
We are way too lazy and way too avoidant to go down the road of having to get notarized signatures and all this and write letters. Like, it's just like, hey, I'm out. I don't need this anymore. This isn't part of who I am. It's not part of my life. And it's just like, whatever. Yeah. Like, if my name is on some record somewhere saying that, whatever. Like, There's plenty of other records out there that have my name on it.
Sure.
That aren't indicative of who I am right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I keep coming back to, like, no one really knows what happens when we die.
Exactly.
And we're making all these commitments that feel like quote unquote permanent, but really they're not.
Right.
It's just a piece of paper.
Right. Exactly. And that's kind of how I view it. So, like, with my daughter wanting to be in it, wanting to get baptized, I don't really worry all that much because what I'm really striving for as a parent is that my kids can be able to identify and understand what their trauma is at a much younger age, 20 years old,
Yes.
And work through all of it and be able to be healed individuals seeking other healed individuals.
Yeah.
That are on that healing journey, right? Because healing never ends.
Uh-huh.
But, having so much more emotional intelligence than I ever thought I could have.
Yes.
At an age of 17 or 20 or whatever. I don't think I really started to mature emotionally probably until like the last 4 to 5 years. And it was because I was really scared of all that stuff. There's a lot of shame and guilt there that I was trying to hide. And so that's mainly why I focus on that with parenting so that they can learn that at a much younger age.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that perspective. And I think, too, what's coming up for me about the emotional immaturity piece, in a lot of ways, that's a survival tool when you grow up in a high control religion like Mormonism. Because if you're feeling like the full spectrum of your emotions and understanding what's happening in your being and recognizing the distress, it's very unsafe.
Right.
Especially like now let's circle back to Gavin at 6 years old, feeling very much like, okay, I need to do everything perfect. How did that impact you? Like what did growing up look like?
That for me, that was always like, I mean, even driving up here, on the way this morning, I was just thinking about like always feeling like I had to be perfect. Like you said, like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Like I can always repent of my sins, but like if I, don't sin that much, then there won't be enough to repent for. Or if my sins are very small, it's never that big of a deal. So there was always this like, oh, I've got to be careful because there's always these pitfalls, right? And they teach you those in primary, like don't do drugs. Well, that's, for the most part, are really good sound advice, right?
It is.
Don't drink too much. Don't do all these things, but it goes deeper than that as you age and get older and start learning more of like, oh, well, don't do these sorts of things as you're growing up. Like, especially talking about like when you're becoming like maturing and having like sexual thoughts and things like that. There's like, oh, make sure you're not doing this and make sure you're not doing that. And don't view women this way and don't do this things. And it's just like, oh, I'm going to be the most respectful individual. I'm not going to, participate in the locker room talk and all that. I totally did. But I had this self-belief that for some reason, because I was striving to be better, that somehow I was better than everybody else as far as like being more righteous or more religious or thinking about it more. And I guess because of my competitive spirit, it was always like when I saw somebody that I viewed as more religious than me, it was like, I need to be more like them. Like I must be failing because I need to be more like them.
Yeah, interesting. I never really got that vibe from you though.
I don't think a lot of people did.
I will share it because even when you were talking about your family, I think my family was not a super traditional Mormon family. As you know, we were not very active. And I think when we were dating, my parents were definitely not. But I think that's why I was like, oh, I can date Gavin. His family is like not crazy Mormon.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
They weren't.
And you weren't like the, I mean, I had dated like very righteous Mormon before, and you were not that.
No, definitely not. And that was like, I prided myself on some of that though.
But there was like a lot going on internally.
But yeah, it was just like, hey, I wanted to be the cool Mormon kid that was accepting and like, sometimes you miss, but we should really be there. But like, as long as we're being or thinking religiously, like we're going to be okay type of thing. But at the same time, like an every week type of family, it's just like, I guess even as a young kid, just having hit or miss growing up, I guess it was just like, oh, there's definitely people that can be overly religious. And it was just like, my family was never that. We were never going to be the overly religious type, but that was always something that I was in my head thinking that I'm more religious than people. But at the same time, my actions definitely did not align with what I thought about myself.
Yeah. But I don't even mean like I thought your actions were inappropriate. I just never would have known you had this internal stuff going on.
Oh,
in your
yeah.
being.
I mean, nobody would have, not even me, because I didn't even know how to identify it then.
Which is so true and so real. And I talk about this a lot, that we don't really understand the impact of what high control religion does to people until they're adults and they have the language and the ability to say,
absolutely,
this is what I felt as a little kid. And I think about that all the time because what I felt as a little kid, I didn't know until I kind of got the language for it, became a therapist and understood, oh, yeah, that was actually not okay to feel as a child.
Well, and one of the things, and I'll go back, and this is like what impacted me a ton growing up in this religion, plan of salvation. I, for whatever reason, from a really young age, maybe 8, 9 years old, whatever, really, really was absolutely terrified of death. What is dying? What is it like? Am I conscious? Is it like being in a dream? Like all these thoughts, right? And to the point where I had so much anxiety about it. Only a very few select people probably know this, and here I am going to say it on this, but I would cry. I literally would have so much anxiety about this that I would break down crying, and I would sit there and I would pray and I would plead, God, please help me not feel these feelings. And being able to identify that now, it wasn't that I was necessarily scared of that. It was just like, I guess it was more just like the unknown. And what I was really actually scared of was my own anxiety. Mm-hmm. And being able to identify that now versus understanding what was that, like, why did I feel this way? Please give me something calming so I don't feel this way anymore. Like, it was very, very, I mean, I look back at it now, very traumatic.
Very traumatic.
Basically shaped my own beliefs about, why I needed to be so religious, was because there was no way I couldn't make it to the celestial kingdom, because every other option was just way too scary.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you sharing this. And I think that the fear of death is a very common thing that people feel.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, I've heard it a lot. I was actually super fearful of death as a kid. And now that we're talking, I'm thinking that this was probably a component of it. I don't think it was the only thing, but I remember too, at times having really big feelings in my body and just being like, one, I'd tell God I hated him, or I'd like ask him to make it go away. Like, it was too much to process, because I think as a child, we don't have the ability to understand something like the plan of salvation. If you look at the plan of salvation on a piece of paper, it is so incredibly dense.
Yes.
And how does a child process it? They cannot. And so I think one way that our nervous system will learn how to navigate that is with fear and anxiety.
Right.
But then you're kind of, in a lot of ways, going back to the emotional immaturity piece, you're not taught how to hold space for those emotions, or to like really understand why they're coming up, and you interpret them as something being a matter with you, which is why you are asking God to take them away.
Right. It is because I was feeling that anxiety. I was feeling that unsettledness within me. And it was just like, I don't want to feel this way. And like, every time when I started getting a little bit older, maybe adolescent age, like 12, 13, 14, in those years, again, we were not 100% church attendance type of thing, but I would always just be like, have this anxiety on days that we like missed church. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, not being righteous enough. We're not doing this enough. We're, really judging myself and my family very, very, very harshly. And again, never telling anybody about this until now that I'm an adult, 37 years old. Like, take me that long to be able to understand, unravel all this, process it, and be able to talk about it. Like, that's a problem. And that's part of what we talk about, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge burden to carry. And it sounds like to me too, like you were alone in it, because why would you know to talk about it?
Well,
right?
And it was one of those things where it was just like, I guess my family was never like, I never felt this super close connection where I could like be like, hey mom, hey dad, I need to talk about something. This is bothering me. That's bothering me. Like, that was not my family dynamic. That was not something I was going to do. I couldn't talk with my brother and sisters about it because, they might think that I'm weird, and then they might tell my parents, and then I might be institutionalized or something. Like, I catastrophized everything. And I was just like, no, I'm just going to internalize that, keep it to myself. And I did that so much. Yeah. So much. And a lot of it, I know that I was doing to myself, but I think the reason I was doing that is I've been able to connect it through therapy back to my beliefs as being raised Mormon. So
no, I actually really appreciate you bringing that up. And what I talk about with a lot of clients, and it's not even just in a high control religious setting, but as children, when things are happening around us that are distressful, so maybe that is like religious doctrine, maybe that's how our parents are treating us, just, certain things are going on. The only way we know how to process it is through internalization. Right. Because to say like, oh, it is this church, or it is my mom and dad, is too complex and actually too distressing.
Right.
But if we can make it our fault and our problem, it actually feels more controllable.
Right.
But then it just leads to anxiety and stress and trauma and all the
We're,
things,
we're
right?
we're all control freaks, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. But the internalization piece is so real. And I think it is, in my opinion, a trauma response to this religious doctrine
for sure.
that you were taught at a young age. And you also offer too, like, not everyone is going to interpret it in the way you did, right?
No.
We're all unique. All of our temperaments are different. And yet I know, I mean, what you're sharing is resonating with me. I know it's going to resonate with other people because it's just so common that we internalize things as children.
Right. And I think part of the reason is there is a very black and white nature out there.
Yes.
The church basically says, hey, it's either this way or it's that way. And that way leads to all these terrible, horrible things. But this way leads to all these great things. There is no gray area. And so for me, it was just like, growing up, getting into this where I'm starting to understand more adolescent age stuff and my brain is developing more. It was just like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. There is no gray area. There is either this way or that way. And I believed that way for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And that was like probably still one of my hardest things that I'm still trying to heal within myself, is getting out of that black and white thinking of, hey, there's a lot more possibilities out there than just this or that. And who's to say that's right versus that being right, and all sorts of different things. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I have this type of conversation so much in my sessions. It creates this black and white, all or nothing way of living, because it almost provides this false sense of certainty. And I think that's why people are still part of this religion or long for the religion or miss it, because it creates what we think as certainty, but really there's nothing that's certain in life.
Right.
And so much of healing is holding space for things that are uncertain and nuanced and gray and in the middle. And that feels very scary and very distressing when you've lived the other way for so long. And so I just really want to highlight that, because I think for anyone listening, like, that is going to resonate. That's why a lot of people will swing from one, like they'll be Mormon and they'll be like all the way on the other side, because like they can't live like this, so they need to live like this over here. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And it's still living within that black and white frame. And can you find the middle ground? And it's very hard to do, because you have to learn how to tolerate discomfort and uncertainty and not knowing and all the stuff.
And that's exactly it. I mean, I remember one of the last times I actually willingly went to church. It was after I'd moved back from Lehigh back to like Cedar City. My wife and I were actually living out in Canaryville. And I remember we were in this big circle, elders quorum, and somebody was talking about like the gospel of Jesus Christ or something, like what are the steps type of deal. And I was just like, listen, guys, like, I'm older now, but think about like the actual steps of it, like repentance, baptism, receiving forgiveness of your sins, laying on the hands, receiving the Holy Ghost, getting sealed and married in the temple. I was just like, I can die today. I've done all those things and I had them all checked off by the time I was 22 years old. And it's just like, so what does 22 to 82 look like? What is 22 to 72? Like, what is all of that about? And that was like, I remember posing that question to this elders quorum setting, and like, I think it left a lot of people speechless and not understanding, like, holy crap, like this guy might be onto something. But I remember asking it because I'd already been feeling those and I was basically already out at that point. And it was just like there's so many, I guess, answers that it was just like, or questions I had that there was no answers to. And a lot of people will, come at you with all sorts of different stuff. But it's just like, but if you think about it, it's just like, what are we doing?
It's wow. I mean, I like obviously know this, but just to put it like, by the time you were 22, you had checked all those boxes, and it's like, then now what? Right. And you have so much life to live. And this comes up for me a lot, that in being raised in Mormonism teaches you're like constantly living for death and you're not living for life.
Right.
you know, and that's essentially what came up for me while you were talking is like, now what are we supposed to do? We like checked all of our boxes. Now we're going to go to the like highest level in heaven. And like,
Right.
That's it, you know?
Exactly. It's like, I better have a bunch of kids so I can have a lot of people there that want to be with me, which I look at now and feel like is unhealthy in and of itself.
Yeah, again, because it takes you away from the present moment. It takes you away from the here and now and what's happening in your life. And again, like when I was talking about the black and white and how do we find the middle ground? We find the middle ground by like what's happening right now.
Exactly.
Like noticing your feet on the earth right now. One thing I wanted to ask you, because you are my first man on the podcast, so yay! I'm calling Gavin the OG man on the podcast. What I think you offer a unique perspective in this. Like, what were some of the hardest parts of you know growing up as a man in the church?
Oh, I think that's a really very nuanced question, but for me, the hardest parts was really just like, I guess for me, I made it about, and whether I made this myself or whether it was something that was just, I was going to do it, whether I was in the church or not, it was mainly about like trying to live up to the standards of the church as far as like not like masturbating, not having like sexual thoughts and all of this. And then being told that, oh, you need to have this pressure of like serving a mission. For me, for whatever reason, hopefully from what I told you about my childhood, that was never an issue for me. Like,
you're always going to go.
I was going to go. Basically, from the time I was like, first thoughts I can remember, 5, 6 years old, whatever. Like, it was just like, yeah, I'm going to, you know, I'm easily going to go on a mission. It's not going to be hard. And I also had a couple of older siblings that were able to help me realize that, hey, Mom and Dad are upset, angry, frustrated because they had that behavior. I shouldn't do that.
Yes. Okay.
My sister, my brother, just like, hey, I'm not going to do those things. They're going to get in trouble. They're going to get grounded from things and they're going to experience this. And I was like, I'm not going to do any of that stuff because I don't want to feel what they're feeling right now. I don't want to be grounded. I don't want to have to go through this like back and forth with my parents. I'm just going to be the good kid that they never have an issue with. Maybe that's middle child syndrome. Maybe that's just, you know, the religious part of it. Maybe it's all mixed together, but that was for me. So as a man growing up, it was a lot of those things of first having feelings for like, you know, sexual desire and having sexual healthy boundaries and things like that. And then having that pressure of just like, hey, you're going to go on a mission. You have to go on a mission. If you don't go on a mission, then none of the cutest girls are going to want to marry you. And then you're going to be considered this type of bad person. And then people are always going to have questions about you. So for me, I guess it was a lot more of like the social pressures of like, oh, hey, I have to do this because if I don't, you're basically committing social suicide. And
how did that impact you? Like how did you navigate, like how did that show up for you? I mean, you might not have known it then, but like having the language now, like having to repress all your like sexual stuff, just having to be this type of guy that's going to go on a mission, like to have, you know, all of that.
More black and white thinking where it was just like, okay, if I'm going to do this, then I have to do these things. And if I do any of these other things that are all considered sins, then like that's going to prevent me from being able to go on a mission.
Yeah.
That's going to prevent me from being able to, you know, get married in the temple and, you know, check all the boxes I've been trying to check my entire life. Because that's really what it was as I think about it now is growing up, going through that, it was just like, I was just trying to check the check boxes. It was just like, hey, there's a clearly defined box. Here's how you check that box. Here's what I need to do. And so that was like my thoughts, the way that I was just, hey, I had to do these things because if I didn't, then that was going to lead to all that other, you know, social outcast and people are going to have questions. And then I'm not going to be viewed as the religious person that I think I am, even though I never really was that person.
Like internally you were.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you ever mess up?
Oh, all the time.
So what
all the
happened?
time.
Like, how did you, how did you navigate that? Like,
Oh,
what happened when you messed up, I guess is my
it
question.
was very like disturbing for me. Again, it brought up a lot of feelings of anxiety. And again, it was just like, I've screwed up. I've done something wrong. I've sinned against God. I need to repent. I need to be forgiven of my sins. And it was similar feelings as being scared of dying, right? Brought up all that same types of anxieties and, caused, I'm sure, looking back now, a lot of probably mood swings for myself where it was just like, I got and I think, maybe genetically or familial or whatever, have a lot of depression that runs in the family. And it's just like, I can look back at myself now growing up as a teenager and saying, yeah, because of the black and white thinking, because of the church's thoughts that I internalized, I was doing something that I viewed as a sin. Mm-hmm. And then it was just like catastrophize everything. Like, oh, I'm going to hell. I need to get my life back on track. I need to do these things. I may have jeopardized my chance to go on a mission. Like, what if I can't get married in the temple? Like all of these things. And it was just like, because I'm such an avoidant, it was like, I can't do these things because they're going to cause me that types of feelings. And so it was like, I never want to feel that. And so I would always do whatever I could to avoid it. And so for the most part, I was actually a pretty good kid. I actually didn't do as much as now that I'm older as an adult. I talk to friends and things and I'm just like, whoa, I was actually a really good kid.
You are. You are a great kid. You are a great kid. I mean, when I think about us dating, so I think I need to set the context too. And you would have never known this because I mean, maybe I shared it with you. I doubt it. Because that's what's also coming up for me in this conversation is how you're not vulnerable.
Right.
Right. So like you had all of these things going on for you. I had things going on for me, but I was not talking about them to you and you were not talking about them to me.
Never.
Right. And I actually think that's a lot different now. I do think people are more vulnerable.
Right.
But we also grew up in a culture where you were not vulnerable because if you were vulnerable, you were weak or you could be shamed or you would feel guilt. Right.
And that's even like intensify that as being a man, I feel like.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So prior to, I dated Gavin my junior year of high school, or we can get into that now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can circle back to anything. But prior to dating Gavin, I mean, my freshman and sophomore year, I had dated a couple other guys and I was a very sexually curious adolescent and I had gotten myself into some precarious situations with other boyfriends. And my freshman year, I had like gone through the repentance process and felt so much shame. And I was like, I'm never confessing again. And then my sophomore year, I had another boyfriend and things like went too far. And I think neither one of us were ready for that. And so when I started dating you, Gavin, I was like, it's so funny that you were talking about like shutting it down, like shoving down. I was like, I'm not ever going to do any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I would say that didn't really obviously not that much, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, I'm not like, this is not, and I'm not going to go as far as I done. And
right.
I was like kind of almost in a like very like protective place of, I can't feel that shame. I can't deal with. So what had happened with my second boyfriend is he had gone to tell his bishop, who was one of my really good friends' dads. And I was like, I just can't do any of this.
Love the small town.
I did not confess. I had confessed my freshman year. I did not confess my sophomore year. And so I just didn't want anything to do with that. And so I would say, I was like that, this is so stupid that I even feel this. But when I think about like the concept of like being a good Mormon girl, like my relationship with you was like the best Mormon girl relationship I ever had, which is so dumb.
I mean, you're sitting there talking, saying all that. Mine was basically the same situation when I came into the relationship with you as well. It was because I had previous girlfriends. But I was more like basically in one long-term girlfriend for, I don't know, freshman, sophomore year, even junior year, part of the time, to where it was just like, there were times that I guess, I viewed it as the time, and the church would say that we were crossing the line.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, I can't date her, even though I still had really strong feelings for her. But it was like, hey, I can't date her because if I do, then I'm going to screw up again. I'm going to jeopardize myself from going on a mission or getting married in the temple or whatever. And so when I came into this relationship with you, I think it was like, neither of us were talking these things, but we were both trying to do the same type of thing. Like, oh, this is going to be different because I'm not going to, lose myself that way. And I'm not going to start going down that path. But I mean, I would say even then, because we're young, we're teenagers.
Yeah.
We're going to have those feelings.
We are. And I think what's also so sad, what this is coming up for me right now, is that we couldn't just like date.
Right.
That we both brought in this like huge guilt.
Oh yeah.
Or shame.
Big time. That
we felt towards ourselves. So we weren't just two like 16, 17-year-old kids dating.
No.
Right? And that's what's so heartbreaking, because again, in my opinion, our relationship was very innocent, and it's sad that we came into it with some of these beliefs about ourselves. And again, we weren't talking about it at all. And that's what's also been, which is why I'm so happy we're having this conversation, because you've sent me some messages on Instagram. No, you left a comment or something and I messaged you. I was like, I hope I was never one of those girls that made you feel that way. And it's just funny because I didn't know that's what you were thinking,
Right. And like I said, it was all internalizing.
Absolutely.
The girls had nothing to do with it. It was more
culture.
My own self-belief and my internal black and white thinking that caused me to view my experiences the way that I viewed them.
Yeah.
And so people will probably think, oh man, there was these horrible girls or whatever. And it's just like, there was none of that. It was always me creating this black and white thinking that was a huge issue with all of my relationships, honestly.
Yeah,
not even romantic relationships, but just like relationships with my parents, with my siblings, with myself, going even further with my wife, my kids, the black and white thinking is a huge problem.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of it in the Mormon church.
There's so much of it. It's actually very, very, very common.
Yeah.
I'm curious what was your perception of our relationship in high school? Do you have any specific memories that are coming up? It was a very long time ago, 20 years, a long time ago.
I mean, for me, for whatever reason, I had these views of not just you, but I only had 2 girlfriends at all in high school. And that was due to the nature. I look back and think I was thinking I was going to marry these girls, right? Mm-hmm. Pretty much my first girlfriend, it was like, hey, I screwed it up with her. Now I enter this relationship with you and I'm like, hey, I can't screw this up because this is potential wife. I might go on a mission and come back and marry this girl. And it was always those thoughts, right? That I was just like, I can't screw that up because I want to get married in the temple and all of this. So that was basically mine. So when I view our relationship, I think back to it and I'm just like, man, there's so many things that it's just like, we were young, we were dumb. I was really, really dumb. It was just like, why you ever would want to hang out with me. I look back and think to myself, man, I don't know why, but sometimes girls wanted to hang out with me and I don't get it because I was the most shy, awkward, stupid person there probably was. I had zero confidence in my own skin as far as dating. Yeah. I was never the type, because I was so shy, that I was going to go out of my way to initiate a conversation with a girl with the intent that, hey, we should hang out sometime. That was not me. And if you remember how we got together, it was not because...
It wasn't because of you. It was because of me. I know it was.
And it was more because our friends were hanging out.
Yes.
And it was just our friend groups were all hanging out together.
Yes.
And so then it was just like naturally easy because there was a lot of other comfort around.
Yeah.
And my friends, everybody that knows me will know this, we were always at my house.
Uh-huh.
So that added another layer of comfort and security for me, where it was just like, hey, we're on my field. We're on my terms. I'm comfort here. I've got my people with me. Like, I can maybe relax a little bit and be a little more normal. But had I been told by somebody, hey, we'll give you $100,000 if you go ask that girl out, I probably would have rather died than go ask any girl out.
That's really funny. I actually would have never known that. Well, what comes up for me is, and I obviously didn't have this level of insight when I was a teenage girl, but now I do. And I mean, from the time I was young, like tiny, and I know it's from being raised in a culture that talks about marriage from the second you enter it. I was like, my worth was contingent on having a boyfriend or having a guy that liked me. And so like, I always was like, I need someone to like me. I need someone to like me. And it's so, when I remember we were like all hanging out at your house and there was friends and I was like, oh, like I could like Gavin. I remember thinking that like I could like Gavin, like he's cute.
It's probably because I wasn't saying anything.
No, but and it's funny because I think because I needed to have a boyfriend and I was like, okay, Gavin's going to be my boyfriend or whatever. I'm going to be interested in Gavin. And I think it just so happened that it worked out and you were really great. And so it was like a really great.
Was I though?
I think obviously at the time it felt really great and fun. And I remember having a lot of fun. Like I love, and still to this day, I loved hanging out with you and all your friends. And I love all of those guys. Right. That was like really fun times for me in high school. And I was weirdly thinking about this. I remember one time, this is so silly, but your mom or someone made like a Hawaiian chicken.
Okay, yep.
Over rice, and that was really special. I think that I had those type of memories, and it was innocent in the sense like I wasn't carrying like the heavy weight of shame that I had prior.
Right.
And so I think there was safety in that for me.
I think too, as I'm like remembering and as you're talking, I'm getting all of this flood of memories. And like, I remember just like different instances where like, I think I came with your family to the cabin once or twice, I don't know. But I think that we hung out on Sundays quite a bit. And it was like, because your family was less active at that time, it was a lot easier for me to be way more comfortable because it was just like, oh, I'm not going to get like, we're on the same playing field here. These are my people. I can be a little more relaxed and comfortable. But at the same time, I always still had this like wonder inside of me. It's just like, is Ashley's dad judging me? Is her mom judging me? What do her little brothers think of me? Like, and so like, that was part of just, again, me being insecure with myself. Absolutely. Of not really understanding. And so.
No, I mean, I think that's so hard not to feel that in this culture. Actually, you made me kind of emotional as you brought that up because I think you talk about a time, oh my gosh, in my family that I can like just picture that. You know, like being up at my cabin or spending time together on a Sunday. I think when my family in my eyes was very, was before like all the bad shit happened in my family. Right. And I think that whenever I connect with people from high school, it always brings that up for me because you got to see my family in like, I would say like a pretty special time when we were like really solid. And it's so funny. I told my youngest brother, Caden, that I was going to have you on the podcast and he was so pumped about it. He was like, yes, I love this. And it's kind of special for me that you got to be a part of my family at,
yeah, it was. It was fun. I think for me, like it was like I said, because I feel like I poured myself into both of really the relationships I had in high school. It was like, you know, when I broke up with my first girlfriend, like it wasn't just breaking up with her. It was, I was losing all of her family as well. And then, you know, I'm dating you, and it was like, I felt pretty comfortable. I mean, still, you're dating a girl, you're a guy in high school, you're always going to feel a little sense of being an outsider. And I think that just happens for most men until they actually get married.
Yeah.
And then they can feel like, okay, none of this matters anymore, whether I'm part of the family and accepted or not. Like, I'm now married to this person. So whether I'm accepted or not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because that person married me.
Yeah.
So like, it was really comforting, and your family was always great to me. I feel like I don't feel like anything really was ever said or done or anything bad to me. In fact, I remember I think we might have been hanging out on like 4th of July or something. And your dad had a really nice old classic truck that he pulled out of the garage and did some burnouts. And I remember thinking, oh man, this is one of the coolest things ever. Like, Ashley's got this really cool dad, and he's doing these burnouts and pilling out in their driveway. Like, I remember that being a really fun time. Yeah. So
my dad was like, he was really close with all of my high school friends, and just like the way he showed up at that time in my life is something I will always hold close to my heart. And I remember that red truck, actually, he sold it to some family friends. And so whenever I see them with it, I actually get emotional because I see them with it. I've had
part
it a
of
few
your
times.
upbringing, right?
Yeah. So it was a part of my childhood. It was a red Chevy, an old red Chevy that he redid. And it was pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, it was.
Thank you for sharing that, Gavin. Yeah, so we dated all of my junior year. Like, I don't know when we started dating. It was like mid junior year.
Yeah,
your senior year.
Just before, I want to say, I feel like it was just before Christmas, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I really honestly don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but we dated for the rest of that school year.
Yeah, so it was through the rest of my senior year. And yeah, I guess if I'm being honest, and hopefully this isn't oversharing.
You're not going to hurt my feelings.
I remember at that time, I had, I think I was either just graduating or something, or anyways, I was at a party with some of my friends, and we were drinking a little bit. And I remember I had you come pick me up because you were like working, but got off late. And I was just like, oh yeah, you can come pick me up and we'll hang out. And I think that was like the start of the downfall of our relationship, because at that time, like we both said, we were trying to be the good kids, the good people.
Yeah.
And you definitely didn't want a guy that was going to be, you know, the stereotypical drunk high school guy. And I remember you being pretty pissed off at me when you picked me up and you were like, you've been drinking? And I was just like, well, I was the guys. Like, yeah, we were at a party. Like, what did you expect?
That's actually so funny. And I don't remember this, but what's coming up for me is I was probably actually jealous because I remember maybe it was my junior year too. I was in a foods class with some of your friends, and they would talk about partying at the Bean.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, like, I genuinely wanted to go, but obviously I had a group of friends that were not partiers at all, and I could not go. But, like, that's what's coming up for me, like, me, and I think understanding activation and, like, being triggered. But I was probably just really pissed at you that you got to do that and I did it. And so then I, like, got mad at you for it, you know? I don't know.
That might have been it, but I really feel like it was... I feel like I had got the reputation that out of my friend group, I was the designated driver.
Yeah.
I was the kid that wasn't going to do this, wasn't going to do that. I was going to be at the places, but I was never going to be partaking because I was always the designated driver. I was always there to make sure my friends got home safely and didn't get in trouble. Well, got in the least amount of trouble as possible type of thing. So I think that when you came to pick me up and I had been drinking and I was a little bit buzzed or something, you were pretty upset because it was just like, now I'm dating this guy that is probably like all the other guys, and he's not supposed to be that way because he has this other reputation about him. And so I remember thinking, oh God, like this, I can't do this anymore. Like that's going to be a problem going forward type of deal. But I think I think at that point, summer was coming up and everything. Yep. And so you had your thoughts. I was preparing to go on a mission. So it was kind of like,
well, it's actually,
we were in different stages of life at that point.
I genuinely don't remember this.
I don't remember how it officially ended.
Well, I don't remember picking you up and you having been drinking. So I don't think it actually upset, like was in like that right. A deal breaker for me.
You were more just the jealous.
I think I was probably more jealous. No, but for me personally, whenever summer hit, I wouldn't want a boyfriend anymore.
Right.
So I think that was a part of it and part of why we broke up.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
Which I will like that. That's what I'm saying. Like this was my quote unquote healthiest high school relationship, but by no means was it healthy because I wasn't healthy. I mean, I was an insecure teenage girl who was like, I have to have a boyfriend, but then now I don't want a boyfriend at the expense of your feelings and anyone else's feelings that I was dating. Because again, I wasn't showing up for myself. So how am I going to show up for anyone else?
I'm remembering now that what ended up happening is we were still dating technically. And I went on my senior trip. And you went somewhere during the summer trip or something, family trip or something. And we were hanging out after we'd come back. And I like made this confession to you that I did drink on my senior trip. And I remember you making confession to me that you had like smoked hookah with like your cousin down in Vegas or something. And this was like this big deal for our relationship.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh my gosh. And like after that, it was just like, I think we hung out for the majority of the rest of the summer. But by the time you were starting your senior year, I was like working full time, wasn't going to start my freshman year of college or anything. I was just going to work before I went on my mission. And I think it was just kind of natural for us to just kind of part ways. And I remember it must have been just before school started. Because I remember I actually was like heartbroken when we broke up. And I went up to my family's mountain property and I was like, oh, I'm going to go scout for deer because it was almost archery season. So I went up there to scout for deer and it like storm rolled in. It started getting all like rainy and scary. And I was like, I can't get caught up on the mountain while it's rainy and scary. And by the time I got back to the trailer, it was raining so hard. I was like, I'm scared to actually leave. So I was by myself, this like 18-year-old kid. I wasn't even 18 yet, I don't think. I guess I must have been like 17. Trying to scout for deer in the trailer all by myself. There's rain coming down. I'm like scared for my actual life. Like, am I going to get out of here alive? Like, this is some pretty intense rain. And like we had broke up and I was like sad for all of those reasons. And then I was like, I'm no longer a kid anymore. I have to be an adult because I'm going on this mission. And so for me, there was a lot that happened in that trailer that night by myself where it was just like, who am I type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I still didn't know because I still had that black and white thinking.
Yeah.
And everything was, I had to check that box.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, this is probably for the best because if I continue to date her, preparing to go on a mission, I'm probably going to screw up and then she's going to hate me and then I'll ruin the chance of her ever liking me ever again. And I'm not going to be able to go on a mission like this. That would be the most devastating thing for me. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where it was just like, this is probably for the best.
Well, it's coming up for me because I never cared about missions.
Right.
I never cared about marrying a return missionary. It was not any like thing on my radar or that I was worried about. And I think that's what's so, again, like us not being vulnerable with each other is that, and this is what teenagers do. You project things back and forth, but like I genuinely didn't worry about any of those things.
And I think a lot of girls didn't.
No, but that's what makes me sad. It actually makes me sad, like I just want to hug like you in that trailer and both of us, we were just like little kids, you
Oh,
know,
for sure.
that had like
For
a
sure.
huge weight on our shoulders that we didn't need to have. And had we grown up anywhere else,
Right.
we wouldn't have had it, you know? And yeah, I mean, I started senior year. When did you leave on your mission? You didn't leave till after my senior year, right?
Right. So
you worked for a whole year?
Yeah, we were broke up.
We were broke up, yes.
You were doing your senior year. I was just working. I was framing at the time, just saving money to go on this mission. And then
I think before we go there, I just have to tell you
okay.
that my senior year was a shit show for me. But I feel like I need to let you know that I like started drinking my senior year.
Sure.
Secretly.
Oh.
No one, but only like certain people that I could drink with, and not any of my, you knew my high school friends.
Right.
And so it's actually just so ironic that I got mad at you the summer before for drinking, because I did my senior year, like on and off, behind closed doors, obviously.
Right. So I think for me, it was just like we were broken up. I was focused on this, checking the boxes, right? So I legit didn't really worry about it too much. I remember the awkward part was we were at that point, your family had moved.
Yes.
And they were in the same ward as my family.
Oh my gosh.
For a very short period of time.
Oh yeah, we would have been.
And I remember I was, oh God, this would have been maybe 6 months to 7 months after we had like broke up. So I was not quite gone on my mission yet, but it was like you somehow, I think, had gone to church that day, and I was at church and you saw me and you were just like, oh, Gavin, hey, how is it going? And then we kind of just like reconnected a little bit right before my mission.
I do remember that.
Because we ran into each other at church because our families were in the same ward.
I do remember that. When did you leave on your mission?
I didn't leave. I actually left.
And like,
I left.
It was like the end of my senior year, right?
It was the day after your birthday.
Okay. Yes. Now I'm remembering.
Of your senior year.
Yeah.
Because
my birthday's in April for listeners.
So we went to lunch or something on your birthday. I left the next day.
Okay.
And I remember because your dad had given you that car, your Mustang.
Yeah, my Mustang.
That you had. And we went on like a lunch date, and that was the day before I left. So then I woke up on the 26th, because your birthday's the 25th.
Yep, good memory.
I woke up on the 26th, and then we drove to Provo.
Yeah. And
dropped me off at the MTC. And you went
on your mission.
Yeah.
Which I do want to talk about your mission. So that was, and then that, and I knew, so my dad for my 18th birthday had got me a convertible Mustang because we all knew I was going to Los Angeles to go to college in the fall. And so, and I left to LA that fall while you were in Russia. But you did write me a couple letters. I have them. I should have brought them.
Oh, for sure. So I guess backtrack a little bit before we leave. One of the funny things is during that time where we were broken up, you're doing your senior year, I'm just preparing to go on a mission before we run into each other at church, because I was going to like the college ward at the time. That's why I was never at the family ward. But my bishop told me, hey, nobody really knows you because your family's kind of newer in this ward. And so would it be all right if you came to church for maybe like a month or two here before you go out on your mission, just so that some of the members can get to know you and see who you are and understand that there's this kid that's in our ward that's on a mission. And I was like, sure, yeah, whatever. So we had reconnected a little bit. We're kind of hanging out slightly, I guess, right before I'm about to leave on my mission. And before all of that, I was hanging out with just my friends. Well, my friends were always hanging out with this other group of friends, girls, that were all at college at SUU. And one of those girls was my girlfriend before you.
Oh, really?
And so there was one night where we're all hanging out as friends, and you called and you were just like, hey, do you want to come up and like watch a movie or something? And I left my friends who was hanging out with this group of girls to come watch a movie with you. And it caused a whole big stir, I guess, because she still felt like there was going to be something between us, and I was about to leave on my mission, and I think she wanted to write me. And,
Oh.
and so it was like, I left your house and I walked home because somebody had dropped me off at your house. So I walked home from your house to my house, which at that point wasn't very far.
That was super close, yeah.
And I ran into one of our friends that was friends with this other girl. And she was just like, yeah, she's pretty upset. And I was just like, what? Somebody's upset with me? So I just remember thinking, well, I almost screwed up with that relationship. So I just got to let that one go. And maybe if something happens after the mission, whatever. And that's kind of, I guess, like when I first went on my mission, I always like had this thought that we would like reconnect and date once I got home. But I never was like an expectation.
Yeah.
But
No,
it
I
was
never
just like-
felt that from you.
I just thought that it would happen.
Yeah.
But after, I don't know, maybe a year into the mission, I feel like we wrote each other pretty frequently.
Yeah. Or emailed too, because you were allowed to email.
Yeah, I was allowed to email.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote maybe for the first, because I was in the MTC for 12 weeks.
Yeah.
I think
Learning
we wrote.
Russian.
Yeah.
Do you feel
Not learning Russian. I was not learning Russian. But I was there trying to learn Russian.
Yeah.
And we wrote, but then we started emailing once I got out to actual Russia. And I think we emailed for maybe that another like 6 or 7 months before you were like, hey, I'm probably not going to email anymore. And
probably dating someone.
and I was just like, all right, not that big of a deal, I guess. I'm on my mission. I'm not going to tell you not to date guys. Like, if that's why you're not writing me, whatever, I don't care. But I remember it was like, again, like this feeling like, oh, am I being broke up with? But what was even worse was that Wednesday that I'm reading emails, because we could only read emails like every Wednesday or something. I'm reading other emails, and my parents had, or my mom or somebody had sent me an email saying that my grandpa had had a heart attack and he was in the hospital. And I'm like, my grandpa's going to die. The girl I thought was going to maybe date me after my mission is no longer going to write me. Like, just catastrophizing everything. I was just like, what am I doing here in this stupid country?
Oh my gosh. That makes me so sad. I will say too, and I mean, you were being like vulnerable about things that you were feeling and going through. I will say, like, from middle of my senior year until about my like beginning of my senior year of college was really dark for me mentally and emotionally. And I wasn't telling anyone about it, but I was internally struggling so much. And so I just think about how I would have showed up to people that I quote unquote cared about during those times in my life. And yeah, it's so fascinating to think about.
It is funny, but I felt like during that time, you were always really positive, at least to me, in the emails and the letters, whatever. You always seemed like you were happy, cheerful, and positive. So it's strange to hear that you were going through this dark time, because from my perspective, I never got a sense of that.
I think I was the queen. I mean, I was so good. I mean, all through high school, you would have never known I struggled in high school. I was the queen at putting on a mask and looking like I was okay all the time.
I mean, that was probably me on the other side.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's how one of the ways that I survived it. And again, like, I was having so many thoughts internally, thoughts and feelings when we were dating that I wasn't sharing with you and you weren't sharing with me. And none of them were even about you, right? They were about like how I felt about myself and my own salvation. And so it's just like, gosh, that's why this conversation, I think, highlights so much of the impact, that we don't know what the impact is until we're so far outside of it that we can see it for what it is. We connected after your mission, but I want to talk about your mission. Then we can talk about us again. And
ask me the questions about the mission.
Yeah. So tell me, I mean, what was it like serving a mission in Russia? Because I've never actually sat down and asked these questions to you.
It was different for sure. Like,
you did 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, it was the only thing I knew, right? So I didn't know what missions were like outside of Russia. I guess I knew what they were like in America, because I'd went on like missionary splits preparing to go on my mission and stuff like that. So I kind of knew the gig I knew what missionary work was about, what you were expected to do. It was really easy because the mission gives you a handbook. It's very black and white. Do these things.
Which is so aligned with you, as we know
exactly.
now.
And I was just like, very black and white. It's just like, hey, we got to do these things. Like, that's really, really simple, really easy. And thinking you're going to have all this success, right? You go to Russia, they tell you, hey, there's not a lot of people that get baptized here. And you think to yourself, as a missionary, 18 years old, 19 years old, whatever. Yeah, but I'm going to be different. Like, I'm the exception. I'm that confident in my religion, right? That people are just going to feel my spirit and they're going to have no choice but to be baptized type of thing. And so, like, I will say that, like, I had to learn a lot of hard lessons on my mission, especially with, like, my first companion, because I thought, hey, I'm going to get to Russia. I'm going to have this, like, cool companion. I'm going to pick his brain. He's going to teach me all this stuff. And when I got there, the kid that ended up being my trainer / senior companion, he had only been there like 2 transfers longer than me. So 12 weeks longer than I had. And just the way the mission worked out and the numbers, people coming and going, he kind of got thrown into this role to be a senior companion and to be a trainer to a newbie. And he'd only been in Russia for 12 weeks. And he was, I mean, bless his heart, he was a lot different upbringing than me. He was really good at playing the violin. He did have no concept of like sports or athletics of any sorts type of thing, which was really strange and different for me because that's all I worried about and cared about in high school and growing up was all of that stuff. And I was just like, I don't know if this is the right fit. Like, I remember thinking to myself, like, there has to be like a mistake here. Maybe I should ask my mission president, like, did you put me with the wrong senior companion? Because I don't think this is it. Like, I can't learn anything. So I had zero respect for this kid, right? And it wasn't anything that he did. It was all because of my own insecurities, right? Mm-hmm. He grew up differently than me. He talked differently. He dressed differently. He was, you know, what I viewed as Peter priesthood. And it was just like his family was the extreme growing up. The first time he had ever saw somebody drunk was in Russia.
Yeah.
Where I was just like, I was like 4 years old at my family get together. Like yeah. I had people on, you know, both sides of family that every now and again like to get after it. So it was just like, how is this the first time you've ever seen anybody drunk? Did you not hang out in high school? Did you not? So I'm sitting here passing all these judgments on to my senior companion. And he wasn't who I had pictured in my mind. And I was just like, this isn't it. This isn't going to work. So I had no respect for him at all, pretty much the entire time that he and I like served our mission together. And it was like very, very contentious because I was the problem. Mm-hmm. I was just like, you need to be somebody different. You're not who I want you to be. And that's a problem type of thing. And so I still just tried to like go through the motions. I really looked forward to church. I really looked forward to like district meetings and things like that because they were time that I could interact with other people, not just him.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, these are great. And we did enough fun things in between that it was like, I wasn't feeling terribly depressed or anything. It was just a unique experience being in Russia. A lot of people don't want to talk to you. A lot of people understand what the church is about and they understand that they have their church, and just religion in general is just different in Russia. They just don't view it the same way, I feel like. And so that led to a lot of people just not really wanting to talk. Mm-hmm. So we had our most success doing like English practice. So like one night a week, we would like have like flyers that we would hand out, and we would just try to hand them out to, and this seems very, very wrong now from my stance of where I stand, generally hand them out to youthful looking people, mm-hmm. younger, you know, 35 years and old and younger type of people, like kids that were like maybe adolescents, teenagers, things like that. It's just like, definitely preying on a vulnerable population. It's just like, hey, come learn English. That's all we're doing. We're learning English, but we're going to have this spiritual thought at the end of it. Because technically, like, being out there proselyting on the street was, I guess, illegal in Russia.
Interesting.
So you couldn't stand up on like a soapbox with your religious book and start like telling everybody, hey, you should come look at our church and join it. That technically can get you thrown in jail.
Interesting.
It's not really enforced all that much, but supposedly it was like a rule. And so they were like, hey, just stick to English practice. Get them in the doors. Once they're in your doors, you can do whatever you want and talk however you want about it. And I remember thinking, oh, that's normal. And it's just like, well, no, that's pretty like manipulative like in and of itself. But
it was normal at the time. It was
but at
normalized.
the time, at the time I was just like, oh yeah, that completely makes sense. We're just doing and trying to be law abiding people that are trying to share Christ's message type of thing.
I want to ask a question about the mission specifically. And you said preying on vulnerable populations. I definitely feel this. I feel like it is like targeted to kids and young adults. Is that intentional?
I mean, I think it is. We were definitely like
encouraged
for sure to like teach everybody, right? Talk to everybody. But the main thing that we were really, really encouraged to do was just like, hey, when you're out there tracting or you're contacting people on the street, whatever, like really hone in on like families, because the Mormon culture is all about family, right?
Yes.
And so we were always looking for like that young family with younger kids that you could baptize in, and it was just going to be this magical spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And it was going to be even better than if it was an individual person, because it was going to be a whole family. And it was just like, wow, look what we did.
Yeah. I mean, what's coming up for me too, I think about when my dad got baptized, because I was 10.
Right.
And the missionaries coming into my house, they were sister missionaries, because my youngest brother was about to be my middle brother, was about to be turning 8. And my dad since has said to me he only got baptized for me.
Right.
And I don't remember this as a child, but now an understanding, I'm sure that's all I wanted was for my dad to get baptized.
Right.
Because that meant my family could be together forever.
Right.
And I think there's just so much pressure in a small community, different than like Russia or whatever, but it's very smart and an intentional tactic to convert people to the church.
Right. Now, think of me, things I've already said in this conversation about being like, here's $100,000 or you go ask this girl out on a date.
Yeah.
That's how shy and insecure I was with myself. Now put that same kid in Russia and say like, hey, now you got to go profess all these claims about God and Jesus and this church. And you got to go up and approach these complete strangers and teach them. It was terrifying.
Yeah. How did that work for you? I mean, I guess what's also coming up for me, were there specific things that were distressing, traumatic? Would you do it again?
Those types of things were the things that like scared me. It was just like, there were traumatic things that didn't necessarily happen to me, but the stories were traumatic enough that I was like, yeah, I'm not going to experience that. And so one of them was, again, I didn't want to talk to people all that much. I wanted to do it in the most secure, comfortable place possible, which was, hey, the church building. So when we're doing English practice, like had no problem sharing the messages there, talking with people, whatever. But out on the street, tracting, whatever, going door to door, like that was hard for me and scary. So I never really did it. But about a little over a year into my mission being in Russia, I was made senior companion to this kid that had only been there for 6 weeks. And so he was really younger, and he was, I guess, me, but a year behind me, where he was just like, we ought to be out there knocking doors and tracting. We got to be working all the time. And I was remember him telling me the story with his trainer that they were tracting, knocking down doors. And in Russia, it's big apartment buildings, right? There's not individual houses.
Sure.
Everybody lives in an apartment. So you'd have to like, hope that you could get into the apartment building stairwell so that you could knock all these doors. Because oftentimes the main door to get into there had like a code. And if you didn't know the code, you couldn't get in. And so you just had to hope that somebody just like propped it open or left it open or whatever. And he tells me this story and he was just like, we got to go out and do this. And I was just like, why is this so important to you? And he tells me this story where he and his trainer were out knocking doors and they knocked the door. This guy's, I mean, in Russia, I guess it's common to be, I guess, just in your underwear at your house. So this guy answers the door in his underwear, right? And he was just like, what do you guys want? And they try to, give their spiel, whatever. And I guess it just like triggered him. He got pissed or whatever. And he just punches the senior companion. The senior companion like falls down. And as he's falling down and like holding his face, the junior, who was now my junior, looks up at the guy and then he punches him.
Oh my gosh.
And like this kid still 6 weeks later wants me to take him out tracking. I'm like, did you not learn your experience? Like, why would we do this? This is stupid.
Yeah.
And I think we did it for like that night because he was so adamant that we had to do it. And then the next day we went to like district meeting and the district leader was his old companion. He was just like, yeah, we stopped doing that stuff. It doesn't work. And it was just like, well, yeah, like everybody knows it doesn't work. That's why we don't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. But he was just trying to give that kid the experience of doing it and thought it would be out of him after that one. But then he still had to go one more time with me. And we just basically had no success. Like nobody answered their door. And if they did, they were just like, okay, bye, creepy guys.
Yeah, not interested. Yeah. I'm really curious about your perspective on this, about, right, when you serve an LDS mission, you go, now it's 18 to 20 years old, right? At the time for you, it was 19 to 21.
Yeah, I think it was 19 for me. So I had to wait until March when my birthday is after I graduated high school so I could go. Yeah.
So I'm really curious, looking back at it now, understanding just that time in your life, because I conceptualize it this way. I feel like, and I know for me personally, 18 to 22, I was figuring a lot of shit out, and there was so much growth and all of that happened. How do you feel like it impacted you developmentally? Does that make sense?
Yeah, your question makes sense. I wish I could give a better answer. I don't know, honestly, but if I were to say it held me back, like I know that's definitely true from today's perspective. Like, and I want to say that, I can't sit here and blame that it's the mission, right?
Sure.
What I can blame is my own internalized feelings about what I was doing, right? Yeah. I had to do these things because I was checking a box, right? That was me. That's my black and white thinking. And that was like, for me, it was just like, again, I was checking the box off. I wasn't actually enjoying my experiences day by day while I was there. It was more just like, oh, here's another fun day in Russia. And I look back at it now and I think, man, there's so many more things I could have done and so many more experiences I could have had I just been more open to not just this black and white thinking. Because I met a lot of really interesting, cool people there that I think about every now and again. And I think, God, whatever happened to that person?
Absolutely.
And it's like, I'm never going to see him again unless I try to like track him down. But like, that seems nearly impossible. Like trying to go find old missionary books and say, okay, we wrote about this one person that would talk to us all the time, but he never got baptized. Like, I want to go talk to that guy just to chill with him now that I'm out of it and see like what his whole philosophy about life is and everything. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, Gavin. I'm really thinking about like it was like that checklist that you had to accomplish, right? The checklist that you accomplished before 22. And and it started when you were 5-6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that checklist was in a lot of ways a trauma response. It's like, how do I navigate the distress as a kid that I'm feeling in this religion? This is how I'm going to navigate it.
Right.
I'm going to create a checklist. I'm going to check all those boxes, and then I'm going to be okay. And so, because you're like, oh, it was me and it was my internalized feelings. And I'm like, yeah, but those internalized feelings were just adaptive. Like, that was what kept you safe as a little kid. And now here you are, a 21-year-old missionary checking your boxes. So thank you for sharing and just being honest about that.
So lots of weird stuff on the mission for sure. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So you came home from your mission.
Yes.
You finished your 2 years. You came home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then like kind of walk me through. I know we connected at one point after you got home, because I remember.
Yeah.
I was home from college visiting, but I was dating a guy.
Yeah.
This is a funny story. I remember I was dating this guy from Cedar who was a missionary, a return missionary. He was older than me. I'd met him. What was intriguing about him to me is because I went to a party that I came home from college and he was drinking. And I was like, but I know you're a return missionary. Okay, like cool. Like I'm interested. And again, it was just like that same cycle that I'd always been stuck in since I was in high school, and I was a terrible girlfriend to him. Bless his heart. But I remember I told him that you were coming over to my house to see me, because I remember you came to my parents' new house.
Right.
And I remember he was like kind of mad. I was like, I don't care. I'm still going to see. Like, I was going to see you.
Right.
It didn't matter to me. I was going to see you no matter what.
Right.
So I don't remember when that was, but I know that I saw you after your mission, and you brought me a hat. The hat. The infamous hat.
Waves in my family. So I get home. I had bought every single member of my family. So my dad, mom, brother, 2 sisters, everybody got a Russian shapka. Like that's what it's called. Everybody like wears them over there. And so it was this thing, and I was like, hey, I'm going to bring one. And I had bought already, I think, before we had stopped writing each other, I think I had already bought the one for you. And I was just like, well, this was meant for her. And I'd already bought it from her, and I already got my sisters and mom one. And I was like, it's a more feminine one. So yeah, I'm still going to give it to her. But when I pulled out the ones to like give to my sisters and my mom, it was just like, they saw the one that I ended up giving you, and they're like, well, that's the cutest one. We want that one. I was just like, well, your favorite colors. I bought them based on your favorite colors. And I think the one I gave you was just white.
It was just white.
And they were like, no, that's the cutest one. We want that one. And I was just like, well, I'm sorry. That's not for you. And so now that, I'm married now and talk about that story with like my wife, with my sister still, they're like, yeah, and you dumbass gave it to Ashley. They're like, she probably doesn't even wear it. It probably got DI'd or something. And I was just like, it was the hat. It was a long time ago. It doesn't matter, guys. Come on, let it go.
I'm trying to remember if I still have it, and I wonder if it's in my box. I have like a box of mementos, and I think I have that picture frame you made me still.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to look.
I'll look. Embarrassing.
I will look. I will look and see. Gavin made me this thing in high school.
Oh, man.
And it was like a picture of me and him. And then like, it's so Mormon.
Oh, my God.
And then like pictures of him and pictures of me. If I find it, I will absolutely take a picture and post it for this episode, because it's so funny.
It's funny. It's embarrassing.
But I have like, I wonder if it's in that box, if the hat's in that box, which is such a stupid place for it to exist. I should pull it out and use it because it was really warm. And I have like some of your letters. I have letters from another missionary that I wrote, and it's just funny. Like, it's so funny. And I kept it all so my parents moved out of, like, after their divorce and household, they moved out, and I packed it all up and I kept it all because I just was like, no, this was before my parents' divorce. When we moved back to Utah, I packed it all up and brought it to the house. And I was like, I just need to keep this. Like, I just had this feeling that I needed to keep all this, like, Mormon stuff.
Right.
And now, look at me. It's just really funny and relevant. Anyways, okay, so you came and saw me, and that was, like, the last time we ever saw each other until, like...
Yeah, I think pretty much it.
that was the last time we saw each other.
We talked. I think we went to lunch. We went over to your place. I gave you your hat. We talked. It was kind of, like, decided, hey, let's not do this. And one of the things, like, I still think about today, especially now that I've kind of left the church and going through this healing thing, you were already out at that point. I think if you hadn't been out yet,
I was about to
you
be
were
out.
on the way out.
Yes.
And I remember you telling me kind of like what you wanted out of life. And I remember you like,
What
saying,
did I say?
Basically, at the time, I know that you wanted a couple of like horses and maybe some land and just live like a simple life. And I don't know, be a mother, I guess. I don't know what it was. Some type of dream that you were going to chase, but you wanted to finish college and, do all of your stuff that way. And I was like, yeah, I get it. You're going to school. You go to school in California. We're different people now. I've served a mission. You've been to college and whatever. So we parted our ways, but you told me to, I can't remember exactly, but the feeling I remember is what I really remember. And it was basically like the message I think about now, because I don't know what the exact words you said were, but the message I got was just like, hey, just keep like being yourself, be you and be happy type of thing. And I was just like, oh, that's kind of weird. And I just drove away. But that was like the message, but I still think about it now to this day where it was just like, oh, that like message rings again and again and again, just like be me, because I feel like to that point, I had never actually been myself.
Yeah.
I was always putting on a mask. I was always showing up the way I thought people wanted me to show up for them.
Yeah.
Not ever showing up just being who I am.
Yeah.
So.
No, I feel that absolutely. Did you go home in 2008 from your mission?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been out.
Yeah.
Because that's when my I guess I call it shelf breaking, but that's when I was like, oh yeah, I'm never going back to this place, because it was around the 2008 election and they Prop 8 in California didn't pass and the Mormon church celebrated that at my ward that I was in. And I was like, I'm not going back. Like, this is gross. I think even though I definitely have had the like black and white, one of the things I've always been, and I was always like this in high school, I just was so curious about other people's way of life.
Right.
Like, as we were talking about your friends talking about the beat, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to listen. I'm so curious. And I wasn't judging them. I wasn't thinking they were bad for drinking. And I just always had this very nuanced view of the world that I think brought me to this place that I'm in right now. But that's why in 2008, I stopped going. And then honestly, and then in 2012, I had my records removed. But really from 2008 until I moved back to Utah, like, Mormonism was not even on my radar.
Right.
I wasn't thinking about it, nothing.
So that's good. I'm glad that happened for you.
So it's just so funny, and that I would leave that message to you.
Right.
Because I think I was just starting to figure it out. So you got married. You said did you get married by the time you were 22?
Yeah. So I got home. I'm 21, right?
Yeah. Let's keep going.
We'll keep going. I get home. We have our talk, whatever. I go through my summer, date a little bit, people that I've been introduced to by friends and whatever have you. Newly returned missionary. So I'm awkward, to be expected, I guess. Don't know how still to like properly just be myself around girls. And anyways, I start college hanging out with some friends, and one of my friends is just like, hey, I want to go hang out with this girl. She's got her roommates there. We're going to meet them at Denny's. And I was just like, whatever is better than where we're at, because where we were at the time, I was just like, there's just a bunch of dudes here. There's like one girl and she's dating that guy. So it's just like, yeah, let's go hang out with some girls type of thing. So we go hang out with this group of girls, and my wife is in this group of girls, but she was supposed to be dating my friend.
Oh. They
were like supposed to be hooking up, and like they had talked and like had been texting very lightly at that point. And so we're hanging out, and we started hanging out with them more regularly. And he's always, when he and I are just hanging out, he's texting my now wife, who he was supposed to be dating. He's like, oh, she said this. What should I say? So he's having this texting conversation with her. that is basically all my words. I'm telling him what to say.
This is a great story.
And I'm like telling him everything that he should say, all this. So long story short, had a friend that played college basketball at Snow. And so he and I were like, hey, let's go watch his game. It's like Thanksgiving break. We don't have school for a few days. Like, we should go watch his games. And he was just like, I'm going to invite her. And my wife's name is Sally. He's like, so I'm going to invite Sally. And I was like, great. He's like, she's in Beaver, so we'll have to pick her up. So he and I get in, I think, my parents' car, and we drive up to Beaver, pick her up. Then we drive over to Richfield because Snow College was playing at Richfield's like rec center they have like their South campus there or something. They were doing a small little junior college tournament thing. So we go there, we watch the game. After, friend that plays basketball, we pick him up and we go to dinner. And this is kind of a funny story, but it was like really awkward because he was supposed to be dating my wife. And then me and my other friend were just there hanging out, whatever. Yeah. And we were at Winger's up in Richfield. And the waiter comes to bring the bill. And I can tell that Sally doesn't have any money. Because she was expecting, hey, I'm on this date with this guy. Obviously, he's going to pay. And I could tell he wasn't going to really pay for her.
Oh, shit.
And so she's sitting over there looking like as nervous as can be about to say, hey, this is embarrassing. I don't have money. So me being the wanting to awkward situation to go away as quickly as possible, I just said, hey, I'm paying for it. And I just said Merry Christmas to them all. It's like, here's your Christmas present. Because it was getting close to Christmas.
Yeah.
I think it was like Thanksgiving time. So I just paid for the meal and we left. And like, I could tell that it was like a huge relief to Sally.
Yeah.
Because she was going to be like, I don't have money and this guy's not paying for me. Like, I don't know what to do.
Uncomfortable.
So I just paid for it all. And then what ended up happening is we went to this like ugly sweater party. And there was 2 going on at SUU at the time. And my friend was at one, and Sally and her friends were at a different one. And I had been texting both Sally and her roommates and my friend and thought they were at the same ugly sweater party. So I show up to Sally's apartment with all of her roommates and stuff. And like, I'm like, where's my buddy at? I'm like, hey, where are you at? And he was just like, I'm already at the party. Okay, well, we're just leaving. We'll see you there. So I actually drive Sally because we're closer now because she's dating my friend, right? So I drive her to this ugly sweater party and we get there and looking around and I'm like, hey, friend, you're not here. And I just came with all these girls and like they're all off, doing college things and talking and dancing and whatever else clean Mormon kids do at an ugly sweater party.
Not very fun, but
I still being as shy and as reserved as I am, I'm just like, well, this is a little intense for me. I'm gonna go watch the game upstairs that I saw 4 or 5 guys up there watching a Jazz game. I'm gonna go watch the Jazz game upstairs. Watched it for about 10 minutes. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I don't want to just sit here watching this Jazz game while there's a party going on downstairs. I'm way out of my element, super uncomfortable. Don't know where my buddy's at. He's like supposed to be my wingman. I'm like, I'm out of here. So I left. And then I got a call from Sally and she was just like, where are you at? I have a headache and I want to leave. And I was just like, well, I left. And she was like, well, you're my ride here. So you need to come get me. For whatever reason, I was like, oh, fine, I'll go get her. Because I was like, I didn't want to.
Well, you're always a nice guy, Gavin.
The thing is, I didn't want to piss her off to ruin the relationship with my friend, right? So I go pick her up. We take her back to her apartment. My friend shows up as like we're coming in to like drop her off. So he and I go upstairs with her and we're just sitting there chatting. Her friends all come home and it's just he and I and her roommates and they all start going to bed and he's just like, yeah, I got to leave. And so he leaves and I was just sitting there with a couple of her roommates and her still. And then I was just like, yeah, I should leave too. And her roommates both left. So now it's just me and her there. And she, sly devil she is, she says, carry me to my room. And I was just like, oh, okay, I'll carry you to. And then she
was into you too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So then we had our kiss. that night, and
I love this story.
we like hung out that whole next week, basically just her and I exclusively, like every second that we could. And then he texted me on like a Thursday. And so this happened on Saturday night. And then he texted me on Thursday. He's like, hey, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, shoot. And I like showed her the text. I was like, should we just call him now and kind of tell him what's going on so he doesn't still think that you guys are like kind of dating type of thing? And she was just like, are you sure you want to do that? I was like, well, it seems like the nice thing to do.
Yeah, wow.
So we called him together. I was just like, hey, I'm over here hanging out with Sally. Like, we're like kind of dating now. And he was like super chill about it.
That's
happy
cool.
and cool. And like, so he had a lot of other prospects at the time as well. So one less wasn't a huge deal for him.
Yeah,
So,
it was meant to be.
yeah.
So how long did you guys date before you got married?
Oh, God. Not that long. So this was all December, basically, right before we get out for winter break for college. And so I'd met her, started dating her. So December, we got married the next August.
Okay, so I mean, quick, but not as quick as a lot of people.
9 months, though. 9 months is still very, very fast.
It is very, very fast. It is.
I guess 10 months total.
And you guys were married in the temple.
Yeah, so we got engaged in April, married in August. We got married in the temple down in St. George. And one of the experiences after we got married that I was just like, you know, you go through the whole temple and there's all the weirdness that comes with that. I had already been through, obviously, because I went on my mission and I got endowed before then. But with my wife, it was just like, come on. Her whole family was there. My whole family was there. It was like a big deal. So it was like, you don't need to worry about any of this. Like, any feelings of uncomfort you have, just push those down. This is fine. This is normal. We're all doing it. And I remember one of the things that I say impacted my marriage so far with her to this point was it's within the first year that we were married. And it was like we were trying to be the good Mormon temple going people. And I was like, hey, we're going down to the temple tonight. Like, I think the ward or something was supposed to go. And I was like, we got to go. And it just wasn't working out. And me being the like black and white thinker that I am, I'm just like, no, everything will work out if we just get to the temple. We just got to go. And she's basically sitting there telling me, like, you're not valuing my opinion. You're not listening to me at all. You're just trying to get us to go to the temple. And she's basically sitting there telling me it's just not going to work. And I remember, like, we ended up not going. And I remember feeling like defeated after. And I was just like, man, this is not what I was expecting, like, marriage to be like. I thought she would be on the same page and we just got to get there. And once we're there, we're going to feel peaceful and all the spirit and all of this. And it was more or less not the case. It was me just, you know, invalidating all of her feelings, not listening to her.
Checking those boxes.
And just trying to check the box again.
Yep.
And I talked with my wife about that. I said, when I got off my mission, when I got married to you, it was like, I had to do that because I had to check a box. I said, yeah, you were cool and you, like, I like you and there's parts of your family and you, of who you are, that align a lot with what I wanted. I was like, but I was also hoping you would be a little more Mormon, I guess. And she wasn't always that way and always had questions and always, you know, wanted to know why this was the way it was and things like that. And that's really what ended up, I mean, fast forward.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, because how did you deconstruct? So that's kind of like, that was like within the first year of your marriage and you guys obviously stayed married and had kids.
Yeah, we went to church. We still would go occasionally. For the most part, we did go quite a bit because we had callings and like there was like a young newlywed ward. So everybody there was married, but we were all like in our 20s. And really nobody had kids. One or two couples did, type of thing. So we're all in the same area, but my wife and I were like, at least I always had some type of calling, whether it was like elders quorum secretary or first counselor or whatever, always had callings. And then we got called together to be like the activities chair people. So we were in charge of planning all the parties for the church. And like, we enjoyed that, I guess. Planning parties was fun, spending the church's money. So we were like, yeah.
The one time you get to use it.
Yeah, we know how to plan a party. So, but then we, got a little older. She graduated school. She was trying to get a job and she wasn't having a lot of good success around here. I was still in school for like one more year because I had switched majors. We decided to have children and
doing all the things. You're checking all the boxes.
And I'm just like, I'm in my last year of school. We can have a child, not a big deal. And, we got pregnant way sooner than I thought we were going to. It was like basically once we removed birth control, she was pregnant. So it was like, oh, that wasn't like the 6 months of, hey, now we're really going to start having a kid. It was just like she got off birth control. Next month, it was just like we find out she's pregnant. And so we have our son, I graduate, and then she still hasn't really found a job. She graduated as a teacher, so she's trying to get a teaching job. I'm starting into doing like insurance and stuff like that. So I basically made a decision that, hey, if I was going to stay in this field, I needed to work somewhere outside of Cedar because it's just too saturated here.
Yeah.
So I started applying down in like Vegas and up in Salt Lake, and Salt Lake called first and offered me a job. So I just said, hey, let's move. And I think it was like she was at this point where she was really struggling and she was like, okay, maybe this will be good. We're moving to this place. We're both graduated from school. We have this little son. He's like barely 1 year old, and I'll be able to start maybe getting a teaching job because there's so much more opportunity up in Salt Lake and Utah County. So we move up there. We lived up there for like 5 years, had our daughter. And then like we had talked about long-term future. And it was like, okay, if we could get down to like Phoenix or Vegas or even Southern Utah, like that's the end goal. But none of those opportunities are likely going to come up for like 10 years. And that was truly the belief I had with my current job.
Just those black and white thoughts,
Gav. And then 2 weeks later, the kid had left and there was a position open. And I was just like, well, I've got to take it. Like I can be close to home again. We could live in Cedar, work in St. George, whatever. And so without really asking any input from her at all, I was just like, yep, we're transferring. And at this point, she had quit teaching. So she had got a job and taught for a couple of years. And then we had our daughter. And she decided that she would rather raise her kids than have the nanny raise the kids. So she quit and just was raising the kids. I was working. So I was just like, well, obviously, if I choose to move here, we're going to do it because like we're talking my career and our livelihood and everything like that.
Very, very Mormon man of you.
And very misogynistic, very Mormon man of me. And like, here's the thing that kills me is she had already started asking me a lot of questions that got me curious.
Interesting. So she was the one who like planted the seed.
Well, where it all stemmed from, she had a really close friend that served a mission, sister missionary. And this friend got home from her mission and reconnected with a boyfriend she had. Well, this boyfriend is not LDS. He's black, was born and raised in like California, and he and her were dating, and they always had kind of this tumultuous relationship. And the church was always a big factor for why they weren't getting married. And so her friend and her would always, as girls do, talk to each other about their relationship problems and everything. And so she was just like, hey, like, my wife came back and she was like, so I was talking with our friend and she was telling me this, like, is this true about the church? And I was just like, oh, you know what? I don't have the full answer for you right now, but give me like a week and I'll get back to you. So
what was the thing that they were?
It was something about like the blacks in the priesthood or something like that.
Yeah. Which is fair because she was dating a black guy.
She was dating a black guy. So that's where that all came from. And so then I started saying, okay, I'm going to research this out. And as I went on my dive of researching, I started finding things that I was like, holy shit. And then I like would send something to her, not trying to influence her anyway, but I was just like,
this is what I'm finding.
You should read this. And she was sending stuff to me. You should read this. And we were just sending
And when was this? Like 4 years ago? Is that what you said?
This was 2018-ish.
Okay, 2018.
Mm-hmm. So we're like sending stuff, 2017, 2018, just sending things. My wife had basically decided that she was just going to be in the church, but not be in the church.
Yeah.
So
which
just
is a
like,
lot of what a lot of people do.
She was just going to show up and just kind of be like there. And
Mm-hmm.
like, if I wanted to still be in it, she was going to support me and our kids and whatever else, but she was never going to be like in it. So she and I were sending stuff back and forth to each other. And then that's when we started being more curious. And she was just like, well, it's my birthday. I'm going out with my girlfriend. And we were living up in Lehigh still. And she was just like, I'm going to drink. I was like, go ahead. Like, have a good time. It's your birthday, whatever. And then we got the great idea that we wanted to, try marijuana together. And so her sister was visiting from like Colorado and brought some like gummies, and we tried that together. And it was like, oh my gosh, like, what is this weird feeling we're having being high? And like, so all these experiences that we didn't really do, that we had missed out, we started having together. And she was basically out. I was still like holding on, still trying to like be in it, because that was my comfort. That was my safety, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what's coming up for me. Like, how, like you in that black and white, like how could you shed it?
Right. And so for me, it was like, even if my wife wasn't going to be a part of it, I was just like, it never was going to be an issue for me. I was always going to be a part of it. And maybe eventually she would come around again one day, type of thing. And I even remember, this still sticks out to me. I was in the Elders Quorum presidency up in Lehigh, and the Elders Quorum president and I were pretty close, and we talked a lot. And we were talking about his brother or brother-in-law. I think it might have been his brother, actually, and how his brother wasn't a member of the church and stuff, and he just couldn't understand it. And I told him, I was just like, I just feel like I know too much. Like, I'll never not be a member of the church. Like, I'll always believe. And like, that was, again, my black and white thinking, right?
Yep.
And then, 5-6 years later, whatever, I am where I am right now talking with you. And it's just like, oh man, like, boy, do I have egg on my face.
I mean.
And so it was like one of those things. And so my wife and I, we just started having those things where we were sending stuff back and forth to each other. One of the things, like, for her, it was just a lot easier. She was just like, there's just so much that doesn't add up here.
Yeah.
And so she was able to just kind of
Sure.
separate it. For me, it was really the CES letter, where it was just like, I'd read a lot of other stuff. I was already questioning. And then I started reading the CES letter, and I didn't even have to finish it.
Can you explain to listeners what the CES letter is? Because I can't. So
the CES stands for, I believe, Church Educational System.
Okay, so it's church, and it's church material.
Mm-hmm. So church material. So it's basically this letter that was like a BYU assignment, I guess, where this kid was supposed to submit these questions that he had to like a professor that was like this scholar of all things Mormonism, and could answer like all these questions. And it basically is just this discourse of this letter where there's these questions and then these answers and these replies and like questions and like, here's what I've studied. Here's all these things. Here's all my questions. And then like the response from like the professor and stuff. And so anyways, I only read a fraction of it. Like, I didn't even read the whole thing, but I was already like, the foundation was already cracked at that point.
Yeah.
So when I came across it and I started reading it, I think I got through like maybe 2 sections or something.
And that's when you were done?
By the time I was done with it, I was like, okay, I don't know if I believe this anymore. But we moved down here. It was right in the transition of like me moving from up north in Lehigh, where we were working and everything, and now moving down here. So end of 2018, we moved back. We're here. It's December. I start 2019 in my new role down in St. George. And my wife and I started, she was like, hey, you should bring home some drinks tonight. And I was like, I should bring home some drinks tonight. And slowly we just started like doing some of the things like, and it wasn't like we were like drunks or alcoholics or anything.
No, you just started living your life like
right. It
adults.
was like we would have like a glass of wine occasionally on like a Tuesday type of thing. Like it wasn't a big deal at all. And then that led into, family obviously talking, and like my wife's family. And we were actually living in her parents' house at the time. And everybody thought she was like this closet alcoholic, and that she would like sneak into her closet legitimately and like be drinking wine in there the whole time that her parents were around. And we were trying to hide it from them and all this. And it was just like, no, like none of that happened. Like we weren't like drinking that much ever. It was just, we had a different way of viewing things. And so all during like 2019, I'm still wearing like my garments. We're still like going to church occasionally, but it's mainly for like family stuff. And it was like, okay, we'll raise our kids in the church, but we're not going to really be like too much in the church. And then there was like a bad experience where an older lady was disgusted with my kid, my daughter, because she was a baby, right? And she was like laughing at some guy that was like making faces at her while we were in like sacrament meeting. Mm-hmm. And it really was irritating this older lady that was behind us. And bless her heart, she was probably, 78 or older. And they came and asked her how sacrament meeting was after. And she was just like, oh, it was pretty good, except I had a really hard time hearing. There was this, baby that was just making so much noise the whole time. And that kind of is, you were attacking Mama Bear's little cub. And that it was like, my wife was just not happy whatsoever. She didn't say anything to this lady.
Yeah. But
because she wanted to be non-confrontational.
Yeah.
So she leaves. And like, I think that's one of my wife's biggest regrets is like not calling this lady out on her bullshit. It was just like, she's 2 years old. Like she's a baby. Like what? Like she's going to make noise. Like, sorry.
Yeah. So was that the last time you guys went?
So that was basically the last time we went under our own like terms. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after that, like my kids got like sick with the flu. My wife was sick with the flu. Then we ended up going to Disneyland with my family. This is now February of like 2020.
Right.
And so we haven't
COVID.
So we haven't been to church for a few months because of like sickness and all this other stuff. COVID happens and it was just like, oh, great. Now we don't have to have an excuse not to go to church.
Yeah. I feel like that, like 2020 was the year, if you were on the fence or you were thinking about it, everyone was done after that.
Yeah.
And what comes up for me a lot is like when you are no longer being immersed in that environment, you start to notice how you feel.
Right. And that
changes everything.
Basically what happened. And so my wife had started doing, she was having a lot of health issues at the time, hormonally. And so 2020 rolls around, her parents keep coming to visit, and it's supposed to be COVID. We're supposed to be social distancing and what have you. We're living in her parents' house, mind you. So she's like complaining to me they're coming to visit too much. And I'm like, what do you want me to do? They're your parents. This is their house. Like I can't just kick them out. Like, and so I was like, okay, obviously we need to leave and move. I was like, let's go rent somewhere down in St. George. We'll move into somewhere and we'll just live there. We'll make it work, whatever. And, it was going to be better anyway because I was going to be closer to home, be home a lot sooner and everything. So we moved down to St. George, and that's when things started changing for my wife because she now had got some things figured out with like her thyroid and hormonally. And then we were down in the sun and it was warm and we had the pool we could go to. And she quickly learned that, being in a snowy environment that's dark, cold, and depressive wasn't ideal for her personal mood and everything. So we love St. George. We like it because it's warm. We like it because it's sunny.
And you guys haven't gone to church since you moved down there?
We have not. And the only reason we have is to support family.
Yeah.
Whether that be my daughter or whether that be like nieces, nephews, whoever.
I'm curious, do you feel like your relationship with your wife shifted as you guys did this together? Like, do you feel like, because I'm thinking about when you talked about the temple thing and she didn't want to go to the temple and how that created a rift, right? Because I think about it this way, and this is how I conceptualize Mormon marriage. So I was not married Mormon, so you can tell me, but I conceptualize it as it's like you, the church, and your wife, instead of just you and your wife. Right. Or you and your partner.
Right.
And so it's interesting, like that was almost like this thing that got in the way early on.
Oh,
right?
For sure. And it was always as like a priesthood holder and as feeling as I was supposed to. It was like at the end of the day, it's my say, right? Because I have the priesthood.
And how that's just like so internalized for you.
Right.
And I actually really love that you're owning this because I think it's a hard thing to own.
For sure. Like I look at it now and like all of these thoughts, these beliefs, saying all this stuff, I recognize and realize is super misogynistic. But at the time,
it's what you're supposed to do.
It's that I thought that was normal. Like I thought that was the way to eternal life.
Yep.
That was the way to live with my family forever type of thing.
And then you take it away and you guys kind of almost deconstruct together and then you're kind of doing these like fun things together.
Oh, for sure. And then 2020 rolls around. I would say at that point things weren't great between us as far as our relationship. She was basically pining and telling me she wanted more, that she felt like we were just kind of roommates. And so I would say for probably 3 years there, from like by the time like midway through 2020, so June, July, to about, really probably until the beginning of this year, things were sketchy on whether we were going to remain together as a couple. And if I can be completely honest, we were probably separated, but still living together, sleeping in the same bed, in the same house, raising our kids together, but emotionally separated for a good solid, probably 2.5 to 3 years. And a lot of it because of, how I was treating her, how I was not able to validate the way that she feels. And that still is a struggle, right? That still is something we are working on in our relationship, where just better communication of just saying, hey, if you can be here, be there. If you can't, just tell me type of thing. If something happens and I'm telling you about it, like, believe me, validate me, do these things. And like learning all of these skills for the first time at, 35, 36, 37 years old is really difficult to do.
Yeah.
Because there's so much ingrained in me.
Yes.
As a man, believing the way that I've believed my entire life.
Yeah, and you've been conditioned and programmed to believe and behave, and all the men around you are behaving in this way.
Exactly.
And even like the women are reinforcing the behavior.
Exactly. So learning these new things, where I started going through like personal therapy for myself, had great therapists down in St. George. He also is ex-Mormon, so that
I might need to get his name so I can put him to my referral list.
Worked really, really well for me. He was a great therapist and has helped me a ton. And then my wife had a great therapist that she had found and had been working with. And then we started doing couples counseling initially because we were like trying to figure out how to like separate and be like not living together anymore, how we would have like an amicable divorce and all of this. And then a lot happened during our, therapy together, counseling, where it kind of like shifted and I was viewing it one way and she was viewing it another way, where it was like, we're supposed to be getting separated. And I was like, no, we're supposed to be staying together and we're trying to work through our differences. And so that created issues in and of itself. During like all of that, a lot happened in 2023, especially with the passing of my wife's sister, where it really, I think, changed. Like I had already kind of deconstructed, had left the church, wasn't planning on ever going back. I mean, it had been, I guess, 4 years now since I've willingly gone to church for myself, like never plan on doing that ever again. But during all that, just the way I view life now and just different experiences that I'm like looking for was like, I was so motivated by checking those boxes off. I was so motivated about, I've got to get married. I've, got to go on this mission. I've got to start earning enough money that I will never struggle financially, because I don't want to be like anybody in my family that's ever struggled financially. Like, I'm going to be different. And like my whole motivation in life was all fueled by that. And then as I was sitting there, and my wife and I, like I said, we'd have our marital struggles and everything. And I'm sitting there thinking like, what is this all for? How am I going to find happiness if I'm not in this relationship? And, working with my counselor of like, can I be happy if I'm not in a relationship? And realizing that, oh, actually, this is what life is about. It's not about checking these boxes. It's not about this religion and doing these things and following this certain path. And there's no one right answer. The right answer is love everybody as much as you love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the hardest part for most people in this world is loving themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, I feel like, where I stand at this moment in time, thinking about everything spiritually, all of that.
So it sounds like you and your wife, obviously nothing's like perfect or whatever, but like you guys
had a storybook marriage.
Yeah. But you feel like you guys are in a pretty solid place in terms of what you worked through and going through this whole process. And I remember that you said this earlier too about, and you were kind of talking about your kids, and you were talking about them working through and understanding themselves.
Right.
And I think almost in a way you were referencing this, right? So that they get
Absolutely.
to be two healthy, healing adults that enter a marriage aside and not having to wait like maybe you and your wife had to.
Right. Or not have to put the pressure on them to get married.
Yeah.
Like, hey, maybe you don't want to ever get married.
And that's okay. Yeah, but you and Sally didn't have that option.
Right. And one of the things I think that my wife grieves a lot is the life she never got to live, right?
Absolutely.
She basically was told at a certain point in her like early college career was just like, hey, if you're going to be a lawyer, if you're going to chase your dream and be a graphic designer or whatever, move to New York, Chicago, work for a big magazine, you're probably not going to be able to be a stereotypical Mormon mom. And so what does she do? She has to pick.
She marries you.
She marries me. Unfortunately, married me.
I'm just kidding.
But I'm being for real. Like,
no,
I was the worst husband imaginable for the majority of our first 12, 13 years of our marriage. I've only now started to become a somewhat acceptable partner because I was so misogynistic. I had so many views that were deep rooted in the way I was raised in the church, in society. I mean, even outside the church, there's a lot of misogyny.
There is.
And it's just so prevalent. And it's just like...
it's under a microscope in Mormon culture.
Oh, yeah. And it's so bad there. And it was just like, okay, trying to deconstruct all that and rebuild new ways, it's really difficult to do.
Yeah. I really appreciate your vulnerability and your ownership of that. I think that is probably a very difficult thing to do, especially in this culture, and shedding it. And also props to your wife.
Oh my gosh. She deserves all the props. Cause I say this, I'm just like, thank goodness I didn't get married to my first high school girlfriend, because there was all that tumultuous stuff of when you and I started hanging out just before my mission that she kind of got upset about. It's just like, I look back and I'm just like, I did you a favor way bigger than you can even realize.
Yeah.
Because I would have treated her the exact same way. And I think about that if we would have ended up together. Like, I would have treated you the exact same way I treated my wife. And it's just like, I look back and I'm glad that neither of those, yourself or my first girlfriend ever had to experience that. And I feel seriously terrible that my wife did have to experience that. And I'm like thankful every day that she accepts me now for who I am and like realizes that, I was a certain way and I treated her pretty poorly because that's what I thought was the right way to
Mm-hmm.
go about living life, and that she needed to fall in line with that
Yeah.
because I was more spiritual, or I was more religious, or I was this, that, and the other.
I mean, what's coming up for me, Gav, is like how many couples are in this situation? Like how many women are being treated this way by their husbands? And I say this like, but innocently and unintentionally. I don't think like you're like this horrible person treating your wife in this way. You're just doing what you've been programmed and conditioned to do. And
Right.
at a certain point, we're still responsible for how that shit shows up in the
Exactly.
here and now. And you're taking responsibility for it. And it's hard. And I think you have to give yourself grace. You have to forgive yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean,
You have to repair with
for
yourself. And then you also get to repair with Sally for as long as she sticks around with your ass. No, I'm just joking.
that is true.
No, but you guys get to repair together and kind of figure this out. And I mean, and then that's all you got. You got the here and now, right now. And
It's
I think
kind
that's
of
really
funny.
cool.
Just the other day, this past week, my daughter was listening to my wife and I. We were just having a conversation. Mainly me just listening to my wife kind of bitch about some of the issues she's dealing with. And my daughter took that as, I have a feeling you guys are going to break up one day. And me and my wife looked at our daughter and we're like, what do you mean break up? And we're like, we're not arguing whatsoever. Like, mom's just telling me like some hard things that she's been dealing with. And we're like, we're not arguing. Do you think we're arguing? Because we're not arguing right now. We're just like, I'm listening to your mom complain about some things. Like, this isn't that big of a deal. And we had to like hug and show my daughter that it's just like, hey, I jokingly said this. I was like, my daughter's name is Rose. I said, Rose, if we haven't broke up by now, there's a really good chance we're probably not going to be breaking up anytime soon. I said, because I said, mom doesn't want to have another relationship. I don't want to have another relationship. And if we ever broke up, neither of us probably would ever have another relationship.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, and I've heard this from a lot of couples, like going through this, figuring this out while it's super hard and
Right.
it's scary and it's, I don't know if we're going to be together or not.
Right.
If you can keep working at it, like there's so many gifts that come from it.
For sure.
And I think what I'm hearing, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like had you stayed in the church, you wouldn't be able to show up for her in the way she needs you.
Oh, had I stayed in the church, 100%, we would already be divorced.
Yeah.
Had I stayed.
Yeah.
But because she had deconstructed and I was already starting to deconstruct.
You were open to it.
I was open to letting her go down her journey. I was open to letting me go down my journey, even though I fought tooth and nail to really feel those feelings, because it's scary to go and do your inner work and feel the feelings. But one of the things that really like cemented it for me was I was dealing with like this hip pain that was like a knee issue all the way up into my hip and my lower back, whole like left side of my body. And I was listening to the No Bad Parts on audio.
Yeah. Love that book.
And such a great book. And get to a part where he is taking an account of a woman who had like a terminal, not a terminal, but like had like a life illness of some type, where it was like she's never going to be cured of this pain. And I then listened how she was able to do inner work and she has no pain from this anymore. Physical pain. She was able to heal herself physically by doing her inner work.
Yep.
And I was actually behind the wheel of a car driving from St. George to Vegas, the most boring drive you can do because it's basically straight the entire way. And so my car basically drives itself, which is nice. So I'm able to like follow his steps and just kind of take some deep breaths and like really kind of visualizing myself going in and finding that part of me that is needing healing. And I kid you not, all of the pain that I was feeling completely melted away.
Did anything come up around it, around the pain?
Like so many feelings of just like, hey, you've needed to do this for so long and you've been putting it off for so long, and it's like you're finally here.
Yeah.
You need to do this more often. You need to visit this part of yourself and find out those traumas from your childhood that need healing.
Yeah. And I just want to kind of put into perspective what Gavin's sharing here is when we have distress in our body and in our system, and most of us aren't feeling it, we're shoving it down,
Right.
it can express, and often does, in physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
And the physical pain is like its way out and its way to really get our attention. And a lot of times it still doesn't get our attention. We go to the doctor, we medicate it, right? But can we be curious and open and explore like the mental, emotional toll that's happened in our being and in our nervous system to then release it? And I think that there is, when you can do that, it's extremely powerful, and it can shift how your physical being exists.
In like when that happened to me, like my whole world changed, the whole views of what I had. Cause at that point I was just, like, I don't know how, atheist, agnostic, whatever, like didn't really and still don't really believe in religion, but believe in a higher power. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I do believe in higher powers. Now, whether that is a physical God, I don't know. There's a lot I don't know. I sometimes think that one of my biggest problems and weaknesses is I pretend to know a lot when I don't actually know anything at all. And so I'm trying to be more vulnerable and honest with people where I don't know. Like, I can't give you reasons of why I believe the way I believe. It's just something that is felt.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like experience. For me, where it's just like I've gone through too much. And during this time, like, one of the conversations I had was like with my dad, because my dad is a mental health therapist, counselor, and helps people. And I was just like, this is kind of what's been going on, Dad. And he's sitting over there, listening to me, taking everything in I'm telling him. And I'm just like, I can't go back to church. And I said, the reason why is because I said, think about all of your children, Dad. Think about your wife, you, everybody. I said, who out of our immediate family, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, me, all there, who has lived the teachings of the church more closely than anybody? I said, that it's me, Dad. You know that I went on the mission. I've read every single scripture that is canon for the, LDS church there is. I've read every single teachings of the president of the church. Like, I was immersed in this far greater than any of you have ever been. And I said, and I decided to leave because it's just not true.
Yeah. What did he say?
And he like validated me really well. He said, I understand. I get it. Nobody's telling you have to. He was like, but I do want you to know that for me, he was just like, it's still something that has always brought me comfort of when I live the teachings of the church, my life has just gone easier. And I said, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. That's fine, Dad. I'm not telling you have to leave, but I'm just telling you why I left.
Do you feel like your life has been more peaceful, more free, quote unquote, easy? I don't know if easier is the proper word, but since you've left?
I do think that things have been a lot easier. I'm able to, I feel like, have a lot more authentic relationships with people, even if they're just kind of like platonic work relationships. It's like I'm still able to hear what people are saying when they're complaining and notice that, hey, if you want to have a relationship with this person, even if it's just a friendship, you should probably validate the way they're feeling. Mm-hmm. Tell them how crappy it is that they're going through the things they're going through, right? And really get on their level. And like, I was so avoidant of that for so long that I never was able to put myself out there. And I feel like that has been the one shift for me that has shown up for different for so many of what I've done, is just being able to show up more authentically. And to the point where now it's like I'm showing up too authentically. And that rattles a lot of people that are still in the church. And so now it's like, I still have to be careful so that I'm not like offending people that are in the church. Cause we still have, neighbors, friends. My
Sure.
daughter still tries to go to church with, her friends. So I still have to sometimes when, the neighbor complains about something that is, because of the church or church related, it's just like, sometimes I'm like, want to scream and grab them and just be like, no, just that's not what you need to worry about.
Yeah.
Like, do this. But if I tell them that, it's going to, destroy the relationship I do have with them.
Yeah. It's a delicate
Yeah.
balance.
And so it's been really hard for my wife and I, where she's just like, yeah, you have to be really careful about every single relationship that you have, even if they're just friendships and stuff. She was like, because, people get offended, they take things certain ways, they react certain ways, and a lot of people, from what we're finding out, don't know how to take accountability and apologize.
Nope. I mean, it's not part of the culture a lot. And I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, that shame, and there's so much shame. There's so much shame in Mormonism, prevents people from taking accountability, because if I take accountability, then I have to understand and unpack and relive that feeling of shame. And so I'll just avoid it. Right. Which that's why there's a lot of deceit in Mormonism too. They're all like very adaptive, protective ways that our nervous system tries to keep us safe from feeling shame, which is one of the most distressing emotions to feel. So.
And that's basically when I was in like couples counseling and stuff, that able to identify like that is my main issue that, I've always been trying to avoid, is that shame.
Yeah.
Of just, hey, you're not good enough. You're doing this. And it's all brought on by myself.
Yeah, but I mean,
who
planted it, because you didn't plan it.
Exactly. And it all got tied back to that.
Yeah.
And that's when I was already gone out of the church. And then I go through this healing journey of going to therapy and start doing parts work and all of this. Like, it all just kind of made sense to me, that it was just like, oh, actually all of this shame is all tied to the way I was raised. And it's not anything to do with like my parents' fault. Like, sure, they were trying the best they could, but the best they could was doing what they thought was the best, which was trying to raise us the best way they knew how inside the church, because they were both born and raised in the church as well. So absolutely.
I mean, I'm also sitting here thinking, like, I think you are showing up very authentically today.
Maybe today I am.
No, and so it's kind of like this full circle moment. I'm really proud of you. I'm actually really proud we are able to have this conversation, because I think that, well, I've never had this with any of my other ex-boyfriends before in this way.
Hey, I've never had this experience either. So,
and I think I don't know. I just keep thinking, like, if we could have had it at 16 or 17, obviously not to like, oh, wish I could have had this at 16, 17, but it's just really powerful to have it now and to like give it to that version of ourselves. And I think this is unique that you don't always, and it's not even necessarily like closure. I mean, I've seen you. I remember I saw you up in Salt Lake, and then I saw you a couple years ago at the July Jamboree.
Yeah.
And my husband, God bless him, he's not from Cedar, but we had to always run into all my ex-boyfriends. Right. So I was like, oh, that's one of my ex-boyfriends when we met. And he goes, well, he's actually cute. He's actually a cute one, is what he said to me. And I was laughing so hard. He's like, that's the cutest ex-boyfriend I have seen. So it's just funny. But then to actually sit down and have a conversation and to learn so much about you that I didn't know.
Right.
About what was happening inside you, and then to hear like everything, your choices and decisions, your mission, getting married, and now where you're at with your wife, it's really powerful. I think it, to me, embodies what healing looks like. And I know you're still healing, and there's layers, obviously, but that checking all those boxes doesn't have to be your life forever. Right. That you can choose other avenues and other ways and make meaning out of your life. That is actually really incredible. And what I also love is you have a lot of compassion and empathy for the way that you were raised, because it is a part of you, and it's a part of me. And and we can't change it. So as much as I want to go back at 16 and be able to have this conversation, I also don't think we would be sitting down right now having this conversation
Right.
without the experiences that got us here.
For sure we wouldn't. And that's like you say, like that's for me, like I don't hate my childhood. I don't hate my upbringing. I don't hate that I was a member of the church or anything like that. It's just kind of something that's like behind me in my past now. But it is something that I still am like, don't want to be like something that is a hold over, you know, my kids going forward. And that it's just something that is just, you know, kind of fizzles out over the years. And that eventually I'm looked at as somebody that, you know, took the leap to do the work and to change the outcome of my life and the way I think about things. And again, on the healing journey, it just is, I have so much more gratitude and love for just normal everyday occurrences and people, relationships, just things, because that is truly what life is about. I mean, a lot of that perspective came from when my wife's sister passed away. Was just like, hey, you know what? There was a lot of shit she didn't get to do that she wanted to do. And she has this family she leaves behind, 2 little daughters and a husband. And it's just like, and I view that. And so even professionally, people come in and they're asking me, you know, money questions and things. And they're just like, hey, should I do this? Like, it'll help me, but I know it's bad for my retirement. And I'm just like, who says that you're going to make it to retirement age?
Absolutely.
Like, you don't know if you're going to live past the week,
let
alone until you're 65 or whatever. And so it has changed the way that I just view the world in general. It changes the way that I show up for my clientele as far as helping them and how I try to help my children. And that's the hardest thing, is the relationship with my children and wife, is because they're the ones that are there the most. And they're the ones that it's just like, if I could just take all the knowledge I have and just put it in that little 10-year-old brain of my son's and just be like, can you just understand like what I'm trying to teach you here? Like your life will go so much easier.
I think that what I just want to say before we wrap up though, and I've learned this the last couple of years in understanding the nervous system and healing and our brains are so like, still, even as adults, they're neuroplastic. And my consultant told me, because I was like, how do my kids receive my healing? Like how do I know they're going to get this?
Right.
And he said, it's because the way you show up in their environment, like it's the way you're impacting their environment. As you heal, you show up in the world differently.
Right.
And your partner also gets that part of you, right? And so your kids get that. And I just always come back to that we're shaping our kids in that way,
right.
You know, by how we show up in the world and how you're showing up in the world. Your kids are getting all of that.
Right.
And I think that is really powerful and hard to do.
Yeah, it is. And that's why life is fun and it's a journey. It is really, really hard to do. Showing up authentically in those relationships. And
I think that's kind of the pull of the church,
right.
is you don't have to do this hard stuff.
Right.
You don't.
And it's nice to be able to have my son or my daughter call me out on things and me be able to take like a self-reflection of just being like, you know what, I am showing up this way and they are right. And although their behavior was out of line, my behavior of how I treated them was out of line. Yep. And I need to apologize for that. Which is
I think one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids.
And so just apologizing to my kids for my own behavior and just doing that repeatedly, I'm hoping will eventually one day lead to them being a lot more emotionally intelligent individuals.
Just the fact that that's something, I say this a lot to parents, but just the fact that you're worrying about them being emotionally intelligent and trying to shift that, I think you are creating that, right? Like that's
hopefully
on your radar. I know we normally do submissions, but I feel like this has been a really long conversation today. So I thank everyone for listening. Honestly, I think I needed this long conversation. So it was very therapeutic for me.
It's probably my fault. I'm really long-winded. My stories have way too much detail.
We got lots of detail, which is there's no complaints there. But I do want to ask, I always ask this to on every podcast, but like anything else you want to say, anything you want to end with today?
Yes, there
no
is.
Pressure.
Actually, there is.
Okay.
To everyone that receives this, that listens to this, I'm sorry that you're listening this long, but ultimately, at the end of the day, is just try to love every single person. And what I mean by that is like, it still, I guess, somewhat embodies a lot of what Mormonism teaches you, because it's supposed to be a Christian church, and Christianity is supposed to be about following Jesus, who was supposed to be love, right? I have a lot of issues with all of that, Christianity, all of that other stuff, but the message behind love, I don't have an issue with. I can get behind the message of love. And I think it's hard for us as people to not quickly judge, because that's what we are hardwired to do, is to judge our environment and is it safe? And so a lot of times you'll see somebody maybe homeless or schizophrenic or somebody that's out on the streets and all this, and they're just an individual that needs help. And there is a way to help them if you can have love for that person the same as yourself. I just feel like more people would just have better relationships altogether. And it all just comes down to loving yourself and being able to love the others as much as you love yourself. Really hard to do. Nothing that I think anybody can master, but
I appreciate that. And I say this often to my clients, people I work with, that our capacity to love other people is contingent on the capacity to love ourselves. So It doesn't mean we can't love other people, but imagine if you love yourself and you show up for yourself, the way you get to send that love outwardly, right? Like it grows. So the more you take care of yourself, and you already know this, Gavin, the more you heal, the more you get to show up for your wife, the more you get to show up for your kids, right? And so really cultivating that love within your being allows it to go outwardly, and it starts with us, and it's a hard thing to do.
And all that other stuff, materialistic, money, all of it, none of it matters.
None of it matters.
What it all matters is how you're showing up in your relationships. And whether that leads you to Mormonism or some other religion or wherever, I truly believe that's kind of what most of us need.
That is the magic. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you all for listening. Until next time. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If today's content resonated with you, please share, leave a review, all the things. It would mean so much to me.